Hey there, tonight we're uncovering why you wouldn't last a day in medieval Iceland's winter, where the truth is, the thrill of frostbite isn't just a chilling tale for the sagas. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in. Maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You wake up beneath a mound of sheep's wool that doubles as a blanket, half choking on the thick, smoky air. Welcome to your morning in a medieval Icelandic turf house, where the only thing denser than the fog of smoke is the realization that winter here is not just a season, it's a lifestyle. You squint through the dim light that barely filters in. It's like someone decided to build a house inside a chimney and then forgot to add windows. But hey, that's what you get with a turf house, medieval Icelandic answer to both insulation and indoor air pollution. These homes were an architectural marvel of their time. If by marvel, you mean they managed to keep out the worst of the cold while inviting all the other discomforts of life inside. Picture this, walls built from layers of earth, rock, and turf, so thick they could probably withstand a Viking raid, though maybe not the persistent drafts that seem to be a permanent feature. The sod roofs are a nice touch, assuming you're into roofs that look like they need a haircut. The first settlers washed up on Iceland's shores around 874 AD, a time when the concept of central heating was as mythical as dragons. Why Iceland, you ask? It's not like they stumbled on a tropical paradise. The story goes that a bunch of Norse folks, led by a guy named Ingolfur Arnarsson, decided that Iceland's harsh and lonely landscape was just the ticket. They were likely seeking freedom from overcrowded conditions and political strife back home. Or maybe they just had a thing for dramatic landscapes where the sun makes a cameo about as often as a rock star. Either way, they laid the groundwork for a society that would thrive against all odds, or at least survive most winters. Your morning routine kicks off with a delightful ritual called trying not to freeze. Firewood is scarce on this treeless island, so you're making do with peat, a sort of ancient, earthy sponge that burns like it's got somewhere else to be. The hearth is both the heart of the home and a stingy furnace that grudgingly offers warmth. You crouch near it, hoping to thaw your fingers enough to tackle the next big challenge of medieval Icelandic life: breakfast. Now, if you thought breakfast was a leisurely affair, think again. Hunting down a full meal requires more effort than a modern-day workout. You're probably looking at leftovers from yesterday. If you're lucky, some skyer, a yogurtesque concoction that's been sustaining Icelanders for centuries. If you're not so lucky, maybe some dried fish or a bit of hard bread, which doubles as a chew toy for the desperate. As you nibble, take a moment to appreciate the sun, or lack thereof. In the dead of winter, daylight is a fleeting guest, showing up late and leaving early, like that friend who always has another thing to get to. The sun rises around 11 a.m. and sets by 3 p.m., leaving you with about as much daylight as a poorly planned power outage. So, you make the most of it, trying to get everything done in a mad dash of productivity before the island plunges back into darkness. But before you romanticize this rugged lifestyle too much, remember that for every epic saga of Viking exploration, there's the mundane reality of keeping a family fed and warm in a place where nature seems to be daring you to survive. History loves a good hero, but it's the everyday grit of people like you, huddled in these turf houses, that tells the real story. As you brace yourself for another day of medieval Icelandic life, remember that the very fact you're here, surviving, is a testament to human ingenuity and stubbornness. Or maybe it's just sheer madness. Either way, as you step out into the cold, smoky air, you're not just facing another day. You're living a piece of history that's as hard and unyielding as the Icelandic landscape itself. Stepping out into the biting cold, you might think you're embarking on an epic saga, ready to conquer the elements with the ferocity of a Viking. But let's be real. You're more likely to spend the day wrestling with frozen fingers and volcanic soil than battling mythical sea monsters. Welcome to medieval Iceland, where the only thing more unpredictable than the weather is your chance of actually harvesting anything edible from this stubborn land. First up on today's agenda is farming. If you're imagining lush fields of golden wheat, kindly adjust your mental picture to something resembling a post-apocalyptic landscape. The soil here is volcanic, and while it sounds exotic, it's about as fertile as a rock garden. The settlers quickly learned that traditional farming techniques from Norway and the British Isles weren't going to cut it. Instead, they turned to what was at hand, literally scraping a living from the earth. Barley was the crop of choice, but even in the best years, yields were meager. Think of it as cereal for masochists. By the time you've planted, harvested, and threshed, you've probably burned more calories than you'll get from eating it. Now, let's talk about the economic system here, which is as straightforward as a Norse knot. Iceland was a cash-free society. Coins were about as useful as a snow shovel in the Sahara. Instead, the economy ran on a barter system. Fish and wool were the currency of choice, and let's face it, you couldn't exactly pay your neighbor in IOUs or good intentions. Fish was particularly valuable, not just for its ability to provide sustenance, but because it was one of the few things Iceland could export. The North Atlantic waters are teeming with fish. But before you grab your rod and reel, remember that weather here can turn a casual fishing trip into a high-stakes game of survival. The seas are rougher than a pub brawl after a Viking raid, and you'd better have a stomach as strong as your resolve. Fishing was no small feat, either. Boats were open and rudimentary, with sailors braving icy waters in little more than woolen cloaks and a prayer. The catch had to be salted and dried quickly in the bracing wind, turning it into the medieval equivalent of jerky. This hearty fare could last through the winter, as long as you didn't mind it tasting like a salt lick. And while we're talking about sagas and legends, let's address the elephant, or should I say, the dragon, in the room. Yes, the Icelandic sagas paint the Norse as larger-than-life figures conquering unknown lands, but the truth is a tad less glamorous. While the sagas are captivating, full of epic battles and heroic deeds, they're essentially the medieval equivalent of a blockbuster action movie, high on drama, low on everyday realism. These stories were written down in the 13th century, long after the events they depict, and were likely embellished to entertain and inspire. In reality, life was more about eking out an existence against staggering odds and slaying dragons or raiding distant shores. The seasons, too, were a formidable opponent. Summer in Iceland is a blink-and-you'll-miss-it affair, a few months of frantic activity trying to store up enough resources to survive the rest of the year. Winter, on the other hand, is a relentless marathon of endurance, testing the limits of human tenacity. Every day is a battle against the cold and darkness, a test of survival that leaves little room for heroics. So, while the sagas might have you believe you're living out a grand adventure, the reality is more like the world's longest episode of Survivor, with nature as the ever-present adversary. You're not just a character in a tale. You're part of a community whose very existence hinges on cooperation and grit. As you trudge through the snow, clutching whatever meager bounty you've managed to gather, you're living proof that the real story of medieval Iceland is one of resilience and resourcefulness, not just legendary exploits. And with that, let's leave our tale here for now, as the next chapter promises to delve deeper into the social and political intricacies of this harsh, yet fascinating world. But let's leave the saga of survival for a moment, and take a breather to dive into the social and political pulse of medieval Iceland, where navigating the treacherous waters of human relationships was every bit as challenging as the icy seas. Welcome to the All-Thing, folks. No, it's not a medieval flea market, though it might sound like one. Founded in 930 AD, this old-school parliament was the beating heart of Icelandic society. Imagine a massive open-air assembly where every free man could have his say, provided he wasn't too busy trying to stay warm or alive. The All-Thing met every summer at Thingvellir, a place as dramatic as anything you'd expect from a country that seems to thrive on extremes. Picture a rift valley with a geological split down the middle, because nothing says political discourse quite like the literal ground beneath you being torn apart. Now, before you get too swept up in the democratic vibes, let's set the record straight. The All-Thing was less about universal suffrage and more about chieftains hashing out disagreements and making decisions that would trickle down to everyone else. The chieftains, or Garthar, were the big fish in this small, frozen pond. They held sway over their followers, not through written laws but through influence, land ownership, and a good dose of charisma, or intimidation, depending on how you look at it. They were like medieval rock stars, minus the electric guitars, but with plenty of power plays and feuds that would make any soap opera writer envious. Speaking of feuds, let's talk about the real law of the land, honor. Forget the codified laws of today in medieval Iceland. If you got wronged, you didn't call your lawyer. You called your kin and prepared for a blood feud. It was an eye for an eye, and sometimes an entire village just for good measure. The sagas love to romanticize these vendettas, turning them into tales of heroism and justice. But in reality, feuds were more like medieval family therapy gone horribly wrong, a never-ending cycle of retribution that made modern office politics look like a tea party. While the whole thing might sound like the ultimate reality show, complete with fiery speeches and dramatic walkouts, it was also a crucial way to keep the peace, or at least delay the next clash. It provided a semblance of order in a world where survival often depended on alliances as much as agricultural skills. The chieftains would gather, negotiate, and sometimes even reconcile disputes before they escalated into full-on brawls. It was part political maneuvering, part social gathering, and part survival strategy, all rolled into one. Now, if you think that's the end of the political intrigue, hold onto your woolen hat, because the real power wasn't just wielded by the chieftains, but also by the stories that shaped their world. Enter the sagas, those epic narratives that blend history with legend, fact with fiction. They were the medieval equivalent of Netflix, the original binge watch, passed down orally, before being committed to vellum in the 13th century. These stories were the glue that held society together, offering both entertainment and a shared cultural identity. But don't be fooled. They weren't just harmless tales to pass the long winter nights. The sagas were a means of preserving history and instilling values, reinforcing the importance of honor, loyalty, and the occasional strategic betrayal. They were as much about educating the next generation as they were about recounting the exploits of the past. And while they might have romanticized the Viking lifestyle into something resembling a medieval action movie, they also offered a window into the gritty, often brutal realities of life in Iceland. Imagine sitting around a smoky hearth, listening to a skilled storyteller weave a tale of gods and heroes, of battles won and lost, the crackle of the fire competing with the storyteller's voice. These sagas often featured larger-than-life characters whose feats were exaggerated, their flaws glossed over, or used to add a moral dimension to the story. They were cautionary tales as much as they were celebrations of human achievement, reminding listeners that pride often comes before a fall, and that sometimes the greatest battles are fought within. And let's not forget the Skalds, the poets who were the rock stars of their day, spinning verses that captured the essence of their time. Their works were memorized and recited at gatherings, the medieval equivalent of a greatest hits album. With a sharp tongue and a keen eye for human nature, they used their craft to immortalize both the triumphs and the follies of their society. They were the original mythbusters, albeit ones who occasionally added a dragon or two for dramatic flair. So as you sit by the fire, shivering in your turf house, remember that the real magic of medieval Iceland wasn't just in its sagas or its spectacular landscapes. It was in the people who managed to carve out a society against all odds, who turned storytelling into an art form, and who found ways to govern themselves long before the concept of democracy was commonplace. The Althing and the sagas were both reflections of a world where survival depended as much on wit and words as on strength and swords. And with that, the day marches on, as relentless as the Icelandic winds. But fear not, for there's more to uncover about this fascinating world, where the past is never quite as distant as it seems, and the stories are never truly over. Stay tuned, because the next chapter will dive even deeper into the challenges and triumphs of medieval Icelandic life. As the fire crackles and the tales of old continue to spin their magic, you'd think life in medieval Iceland was all about epic quests and sagas, right? Well, let's put down the storybook for a second and dive into something a little less glamorous, but every bit as crucial, the nitty-gritty of staying alive in the land of fire and ice. Because, spoiler alert, life wasn't all heroics and hearty laughter. It was also a parade of ailments and questionable remedies that would make a modern-day hypochondriac faint. First off, let's talk about the health scene, or lack thereof. The average lifespan was about 40 years, tops. That's right, you'd likely be considered a seasoned elder by the ripe old age of 35. Why so short-lived? It wasn't just the harsh climate. It was the fact that medieval Iceland was basically a petri dish of illnesses with no antibiotics in sight. Common ailments included everything from arthritis, thanks to the damp cold seeping into your bones, to respiratory issues from the constant inhalation of peat smoke. And let's not forget scurvy, because when fresh fruits and veggies are rarer than a polite Viking, vitamin C deficiency becomes your body's way of saying, "I told you so." Now, if you did fall ill, you'd better hope the local healer was in a good mood. Medical knowledge was less Grey's Anatomy and more Game of Thrones, without the dragons, but with plenty of guesswork. Remedies were a cocktail of superstition and trial and error. Got a toothache? Chew on a root and maybe recite a few spells while you're at it. Broken bone? A splint made from whatever sticks you can find might do the trick, assuming you don't develop an infection that requires amputating your entire limb. In essence, medieval medicine was a roll of the dice, with outcomes that ranged from miraculous recovery to better luck next time. And let's not even get started on hygiene. Bathing was a luxury, not a routine, especially in a place where water froze before it hit the ground. Most Icelanders likely bathed once or twice a year, and that's not because they were lazy. It was because hypothermia was a real party pooper. Instead, you'd rely on the cleansing properties of smoke and sweat, which sounds about as effective as trying to clean a carpet with a matchstick. Hair was often washed with lye soap, which could double as a paint thinner, and teeth were cleaned with a rag dipped in ashes. Forget about minty fresh breath. Think more along the lines of earthly aroma. Diet, of course, played a huge role in both health and survival. The Icelandic menu was a testament to necessity over choice. Fish, lamb, and dairy were the holy trinity of sustenance. Fish was a staple, dried, salted, and as common as the peat burning in your hearth. Lamb was a treat, but it was also a resource you couldn't overindulge in if you hoped to keep your flock intact. Dairy products like skyr, a thick yogurt, were a lifeline, providing essential nutrients when the land offered little else. But let's be honest, variety wasn't exactly on the menu. If you were hoping for a side of kale or some citrus zest, you'd better learn to love the taste of desperation. The constant lack of variety led to nutrient deficiencies, with scurvy being a particularly unfun consequence. The occasional seal or seabird might make its way to the table, but it wasn't enough to balance out a diet that would make a dietitian weep. Yet, despite these challenges, Icelanders found ways to make it work, developing techniques to store and preserve food that were as clever as they were necessary. Drying, fermenting, and salting were the cornerstones of this culinary endurance test, ensuring that even in the depths of winter, you wouldn't go completely hungry. And speaking of endurance, let's address the elephant in the room: religion. In a place where the elements seemed hell-bent on ending you, spirituality was both a comfort and a survival tool. The Norse gods were slowly being edged out by Christianity, but old beliefs didn't die, they adapted. Icelanders would hedge their bets, offering a nod to Thor while also crossing themselves for good measure. It was a spiritual insurance policy, because when faced with the unknown, a little divine intervention never hurt. Christianity officially took hold around the year 1000 AD, but pagan practices lingered, especially in the rural areas. The church became a new center of community life, offering not just spiritual guidance, but also practical help. Monasteries became repositories of knowledge, where the educated few could read and write, bringing a semblance of order to a world governed by oral tradition. Yet, even with Christianity's growing influence, old customs hung on like a stubborn winter fog, blending into a unique cultural tapestry that was distinctly Icelandic. This interplay of old and new beliefs created a fascinating dynamic. Superstitions flourished, with Icelanders taking no chances when it came to the supernatural. Trolls and elves were as real to them as the biting wind, and stories of the hidden folk served as both cautionary tales and explanations for the inexplicable. They lived in harmony with these beliefs, weaving them into their daily lives as naturally as they did their fishing nets. So, as you survive yet another day in this medieval saga come to life, remember that the people of Iceland weren't just enduring the elements. They were navigating a world as rich and complex as the volcanic soil beneath their feet. They were warriors not in the sense of wielding swords, but in their ability to adapt, endure, and find meaning in the midst of hardship. And while the sagas may tell tales of gods and heroes, the real legends are those who faced each day with grit and a smattering of humor, living lives that were anything but ordinary. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover about this fascinating land where the past is never quite as distant as it seems, and the stories are never truly over. Next, we'll dive into the social intricacies that shaped this resilient society, where every day was a new chapter in the ongoing saga of survival. As the last embers of daylight flicker out and the cold creeps in with the stealth of a ninja in woolen socks, you gather with your fellow Icelanders in the one place where warmth is more than just a state of mind, the communal room. Welcome to your evening in medieval Iceland, where the hearth is the epicenter of human interaction, and the art of storytelling is as crucial to survival as the thick walls of your turf house. The evening activities are less about individual entertainment and more about collective survival. With long winter nights that stretch like an overeager elastic band, these gatherings are the medieval equivalent of a Netflix binge, minus the screen, but with all the drama. You're not just passing time, you're weaving the fabric of community, one saga at a time. Everyone huddles together, maximizing body heat and minimizing the existential dread that comes with living under a sky that's more often cloudy than clear. In this cozy cocoon, the air is thick with the smell of peat smoke and the sound of voices. Someone strums a langspel, a traditional Icelandic instrument that might best be described as a cross between a violin and a plank of wood. It's not Carnegie Hall, but it sets the mood. The stories flow, each tale a tapestry of gods, heroes, and the occasional troll. These aren't just bedtime stories. They're cultural currency, preserving history and teaching lessons as vital as the food stored for winter. And oh, those long winter nights. The darkness is relentless, a reminder that nature here is as unforgiving as an unpaid Norse warrior. This is where the culture of Iceland finds its heart. The shared stories and songs become a lifeline, binding people together as tightly as the stitches in a wool sweater. They create a sense of continuity, a connection to ancestors who lived, laughed, and lamented under the same stars, or lack thereof. In the communal warmth, you realize that these gatherings are more than just a way to pass time. They're a survival mechanism, ensuring that the community doesn't just endure the cold, but thrives despite it. The bond forged in these moments is as strong as any iron sword. It turns the harsh reality of winter into a shared experience, where everyone contributes to a collective narrative, one that's been unfolding for generations. As you listen, it's easy to romanticize this life, to picture yourself as part of an epic saga, perhaps even imagine a cameo in a saga of your own. But let's hold that thought. While the allure of Viking life is tempting, who doesn't love a good horned helmet, even if it's historically inaccurate? The reality is a bit more gritty. The romantic image of Vikings as fearless explorers and warriors is only part of the story. The truth is, they were also farmers, fishermen, and survivors, doing whatever it took to make it through another day. Modern portrayals tend to gloss over the grueling day-to-day existence, focusing instead on the glory of battle and the thrill of discovery. But if you're actually living it, the daily grind of medieval Iceland is less about glory and more about grit. It's about getting through each day without succumbing to the cold, hunger, or an unfortunate encounter with a disgruntled neighbor. And while we're myth-busting, let's talk about the legendary Viking stoicism. Sure, the sagas are full of stoic heroes who faced death with a shrug and a witty quip. But in reality, the people were as human as you or me, and they felt the weight of their harsh environment keenly. The stoic facade was probably more about necessity than choice, a practical response to a world that seemed determined to test their limits at every turn. So, as you sit by the fire, wrapped in furs and stories, remember that the real legacy of medieval Iceland isn't just in its sagas or its spectacular landscapes. It's in the strength and resilience of its people, who managed to create a rich cultural tapestry in one of the most challenging environments imaginable. They were pioneers of survival, crafting a society where cooperation and community were the true measures of strength. In the end, the romance and reality of medieval Iceland are two sides of the same coin. The stories of gods and heroes are captivating, but so too is the tale of everyday people who found ways to thrive against staggering odds. Their legacy is a testament to the power of community, storytelling, and the human spirit. a story that continues to inspire, long after the final tale has been told. As you drift off to sleep, warmed by the fire and the stories of old, remember that you're not just closing the book on another day in medieval Iceland. You're part of a grand narrative that spans centuries, a story of survival, resilience, and the enduring power of human connection. And in a world where the past is never truly past, that's a story worth telling and retelling for generations to come. In the dusty annals of history, where empires rise and fall like a dramatic game of dominoes, the Parthian Empire sauntered onto the scene around 247 BC with all the swagger of a scrappy underdog ready to take on the heavyweight champs. Emerging from the chaos of the crumbling Seleucid Empire, this upstart bunch, led by the Arsacid dynasty, didn't just want a slice of the regional pie. They aimed to bake their own. Kicking things off with the founding father of the Parthian Empire, let's talk about Arsaces I, a name that for some reason didn't make it big in baby books. He was the man who threw the first proverbial punch in the empire's quest for dominance. With the Seleucid Empire distracted by its own internal squabbles and external enemies, Arsaces I seized the opportunity to carve out a kingdom in the northeastern region of modern Iran. Think of it as the ultimate real estate grab, complete with hostile takeovers and some strategic elbowing of the neighbors. Now, you might be wondering, why did the Parthians even bother with this whole empire-building gig? Well, here's the thing. They had a secret weapon, geography. Nestled along the Silk Road, that ancient highway of commerce and culture, the Parthians were perfectly positioned to capitalize on the bustling trade between the East and West. Imagine the Silk Road as the ancient world's version of Amazon, but with a bit more sand and fewer drones. By controlling key trade routes, the Parthians could charge tolls, levy taxes, and generally rake in the cash like a Las Vegas casino. But with great power comes great responsibility, and by responsibility, I mean a lot of angry neighbors. The Seleucid Empire, for one, wasn't exactly thrilled with this new kid on the block. Picture the Seleucids as the grumpy old man yelling at the Parthians to get off their lawn. Skirmishes ensued, with the Parthians initially playing the role of the pesky fly buzzing around the Seleucid picnic. However, like any good soap opera, the plot thickened. The Parthians proved to be more than just a nuisance. They were agile horsemen with a knack for hit-and-run tactics that would make even the most seasoned military strategists do a double take. Speaking of strategies, let's talk about the Parthian shot, a maneuver so famous it became a phrase. In battle, Parthian archers would pretend to retreat, only to twist in their saddles and fire arrows at their pursuers, turning what looked like a retreat into a deadly ambush. It's the ancient equivalent of dropping a mic and walking off stage, only with a lot more pointy projectiles. The Parthian Empire's rise was no overnight success, though. It took decades of strategic maneuvering, alliances, and the occasional betrayal. Because what's a good imperial saga without a little backstabbing? By the time Mithridates I, a descendant of Arsaces, came to power around 171 BC, the Parthian Empire was ready to strut its stuff on the world stage. Under Mithridates, the empire expanded dramatically, gobbling up territories like a kid in a candy store. He even managed to snag Media and Mesopotamia, further bolstering the Parthian hold on trade and territory. Now, let's pause for a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of the Parthian Empire's strategy. Here was a relatively small, initially overlooked kingdom that managed to leverage its geographic position and military prowess to become a major player in the region. It wasn't just about grabbing land. It was about controlling the flow of goods, ideas, and influence. The Parthians were the original masters of the supply chain, long before the term became a corporate buzzword. Of course, no empire rises without a few myths tagging along for the ride. The romantic notion of the Parthians as noble warriors defending their homeland is a narrative that certainly has its allure. But the reality was a bit more complicated. They were savvy politicians and shrewd negotiators, just as likely to strike a deal as they were to draw a sword. And when it came to culture, they were like magpies, picking up bits and pieces from the Greeks, Persians, and others, blending them into a unique Parthian style. By the time the Parthians were at their zenith, they had become a force to be reckoned with, holding their own against the likes of Rome. In fact, the Parthian Empire's existence was a thorn in Rome's side for nearly 300 years. Despite several attempts, The Romans never managed to fully subdue the Parthians. Julius Caesar himself planned a campaign against them, but well, we all know how that turned out. Et tu, Brute. In the grand tapestry of history, the Parthian Empire might not get as much spotlight as some of its contemporaries, but it certainly left its mark. From their strategic use of geography to their innovative military tactics, the Parthians were anything but a footnote. They were a testament to the power of cunning, resilience, and the occasional well-aimed arrow. Let's switch gears now and talk sharp, literal sharp. The Parthians weren't just about galloping into battle with arrows flying. They were also superb at another kind of warfare, economic. Picture this, if you will. The Parthians, with their prime real estate snuggled along the Silk Road, turned their empire into history's Costco. But instead of bulk toilet paper, we're talking Chinese silk, Indian spices, and Persian rugs. The Silk Road was more than just a trade route. It was the ancient world's internet, connecting different cultures, ideas, and of course, goods. But how did the Parthians manage to transform their dusty corner of the world into a bustling marketplace? Well, it all boils down to location, location, location. The Parthians sat at the crossroads of the east and west, where the Silk Road split and branched like a well-tended bonsai tree. This wasn't just a lucky draw in the geographic lottery. It was a strategic jackpot. They controlled the flow of goods between China, India, the Middle East, and the Roman Empire, taking a cut from every caravan that trudged across their domain. With a savvy mix of diplomacy and taxation, they turned the Silk Road into their personal toll booth. Now, you've probably heard tales of silk-clad merchants and their camel caravans glistening in the desert sun, like some glamorous throwback to a Ralph Lauren ad. The reality, though, was a bit grittier. Picture endless stretches of barren landscapes, sandstorms that could exfoliate your skin off, and bandits lurking in the shadows, ready to relieve you of your valuables, and maybe your life. Yet these ancient merchants accepted these risks, driven by the promise of profit and the thrill of adventure. And the Parthians were right there in the thick of it, offering protection, logistics, and a market. If you think modern business moguls are cutthroat, meet the Parthian traders. These folks had hustled long before it was a hashtag. They were the original masters of supply and demand, importing silk from China that could fetch prices as high as 100 denarii per pound in Rome, a small fortune at the time. They also dealt in spices from India, with black pepper being so prized that it was literally worth its weight in gold. And let's not forget the exotic goods like lapis lazuli, fine textiles, and precious metals that passed through their hands. It's no wonder the Parthians' coffers swelled like a balloon at a kid's birthday party. But wait, there's more. The Parthian economy wasn't just about buying and selling goods. It was about the exchange of ideas and culture. As merchants traveled, they didn't just carry silks and spices. They also brought stories, religions, and technologies. This cultural cross-pollination meant that ideas like Buddhism and Zoroastrianism spread across the continent, while inventions such as paper and gunpowder slowly made their way west. The Parthians, ever the opportunists, absorbed these influences and integrated them into their own society, creating a cultural tapestry as rich and diverse as the goods they traded. However, before you get too starry-eyed about this ancient bazaar of wonders, let's pop that romantic bubble with some harsh realities. The Parthian economy, like any other, was not immune to the pitfalls of trade. Inflation, supply chain disruptions, and economic disparity were just as real in the ancient world as they are today. A bad harvest, or a particularly ruthless band of raiders, could send ripples through the economy, impacting everyone from the wealthiest merchant to the humblest farmer. And while the Parthians were adept at navigating these challenges, they were not invincible. It's also worth noting that this economic prosperity didn't trickle down to everyone. The Parthian social structure was as hierarchical as a corporate ladder, with the aristocracy reaping the lion's share of the profits, while the lower classes toiled away. This is a tale as old as time, those at the top living in opulence, while those at the bottom scrounged for scraps. The difference here is that instead of stock options and golden parachutes, it was more about lavish feasts and silk robes. But let's not end on a downer. The Parthians' mastery of trade and economy is a testament to their ingenuity and adaptability. They took the hand they were dealt and played it to perfection, turning their empire into a hub of commerce and culture. And while they couldn't escape the occasional economic hiccup, They managed to maintain a thriving marketplace that connected continents and cultures. So, next time you find yourself browsing an online marketplace, spare a thought for the Parthian traders who helped set the stage for global commerce. They were the original deal-makers, long before anyone had ever heard of a blue light special. Now, shifting from the economic bazaar to the artistic auditorium, let's dive into the vibrant world of Parthian culture and art, a place where East truly met West in a collision of styles and influences that would make even the most eclectic art collector's head spin. Think of the Parthian Empire as the ultimate mashup artist, combining elements from Greek, Persian, and local traditions into something uniquely their own. In the architectural department, for example, the Parthians were like the Frank Lloyd Wrights of their day, crafting structures that were as functional as they were fabulous. Take their capital, Ctesiphon, located near modern-day Baghdad. The crown jewel here was the Tak Kasra, an awe-inspiring brick arch that soared over 37 meters high and stretched 48 meters long. This was no quaint country chapel. It was a grandiose statement of power and architectural prowess, built to impress both visitors and rivals. The Parthians didn't just slap together some bricks and call it a day. They engineered an architectural marvel that stood the test of time. Well, at least, until the elements took their toll. If you ever find yourself lamenting the lack of ancient architecture in your neighborhood, just remember that the Tak Kasra was basically the Parthian Empire's answer to the Empire State Building. But the Parthians weren't all about laying bricks. Their love for art and sculpture knew no bounds, and they had a knack for blending styles. They incorporated Hellenistic elements while maintaining an unmistakable Parthian flair. Picture sculptures with the realism of Greek art, but infused with the decorative elegance of Persian motifs. And if you think your selfie game is strong, consider this. The Parthians were immortalizing their likenesses in stone long before Instagram was a twinkle in the digital eye. Their statues often depicted nobility with elaborate hairstyles and intricate robes, a testament to the fashion-forward mindset of Parthian society. Speaking of fashion, let's not forget the Parthian fondness for headgear. Their crowns were more than just fancy hats. They were symbols of power and prestige. The kings of Parthia wore tiaras adorned with jewels and intricate designs, each crown a walking billboard of their wealth and influence. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of wearing a Rolex while driving a convertible, only with more gemstones and fewer traffic lights. It's safe to say that when it came to headwear, the Parthians had a flair for the dramatic, outshining even today's most ostentatious fashionistas. Now, let's unravel the legend of the Parthian shot, the military maneuver that Hollywood loves to romanticize. In movies, you might see Parthian warriors gallantly charging into battle, arrows flying with the precision of Olympic archers. The reality, however, was a bit less glamorous and a lot more practical. The Parthians were horse archers par excellence, and their famed tactic involved a strategic feigned retreat. As they appeared to flee, they would twist in their saddles and unleash a volley of arrows at their unsuspecting pursuers. It was a cunning move that often turned the tide of battle, but let's not forget that it required a level of balance and skill that would make a Cirque du Soleil performer envious. Hollywood might paint Parthian warriors as noble savages, fighting for honor and glory, but the truth is they were calculated tacticians, playing a game of chess while everyone else was still learning checkers. The Parthian shot wasn't just a flashy trick. It was a testament to their understanding of psychological warfare. By turning a retreat into an ambush, they transformed a potential defeat into a triumphant victory, leaving their enemies scratching their heads and nursing their wounds. Yet, like any good story, there's a twist. The Parthians' reputation as formidable warriors wasn't just built on horseback archery. They were also adept at siege warfare, a skill that came in handy when dealing with fortified cities. Armed with battering rams, siege towers, and a healthy dose of determination, the Parthians had the tactical prowess to breach even the most stubborn defenses. Their ability to adapt and innovate on the battlefield made them a force to be reckoned with, even when outnumbered. But let's not get carried away with tales of military might. The Parthian Empire's cultural achievements extended far beyond the battlefield. They were patrons of the arts, fostering a cultural renaissance that saw the flourishing of literature, music, and theater. The Parthians were like the Medici family of their time, supporting artists and intellectuals who brought their unique talents to the empire. Poetry, philosophy, and music thrived in Parthian society, creating a vibrant cultural tapestry that rivaled the greatest artistic centers of the ancient world. And while we're busting myths, let's tackle the notion that the Parthians were cultural copycats, merely borrowing from their neighbors. Sure, they absorbed influences from the Greeks and Persians, but they didn't just mimic what they saw. They synthesized these elements into something distinctly Parthian, creating a cultural identity that was both diverse and cohesive. It was like taking the best ingredients from different cuisines and whipping up a culinary masterpiece that left a lasting legacy. As we continue to peel back the layers of the Parthian Empire, it's clear that they were more than just warriors and traders. They were cultural innovators, blending influences from East and West into a rich tapestry that still captivates historians and art lovers alike. Their legacy is a testament to the power of cultural exchange and the enduring impact of artistic creativity. So, while the Parthians might not have the same name recognition as the Greeks or Romans, they certainly knew how to make a statement, whether it was through a well-aimed arrow or a beautifully crafted piece of art. And with that, we'll hit pause on our exploration of Parthian culture and art. We've peeled back the curtain on their architectural feats, artistic endeavors, and military innovations, but there's still more to uncover. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the fascinating tapestry of the Parthian Empire, where each thread offers a new glimpse into their remarkable legacy. As we peel back the curtain on the Parthian Empire, we find ourselves in the thick of their political drama, a scene straight out of a historical soap opera, where every act of betrayal and power play could rival anything penned by Shakespeare. The Parthian Empire's government wasn't your run-of-the-mill top-down monarchy. It was more like an intricate dance between chaos and order, where the Arsacid family juggled power with all the grace of a cat herder in a room full of laser pointers. At the heart of this political spectacle was their feudal system, a structure so flexible it could give a yoga instructor a run for their money. Picture a patchwork quilt of noble families, each with their own fiefdoms, loyalties, and ambitions. The Arsacid kings, ruling over them, had to be as much diplomats as they were monarchs, constantly negotiating with a nobility that had more autonomy than a teenager with a new driver's license. It was a game of thrones where everyone's sitting on a different chair, and at any moment, someone might try to swap seats. But why this feudal setup, you ask? Well, it was partly a strategic move to maintain control over a sprawling empire that stretched from the Euphrates to the Oxus River. With lands so vast, the Arsacids knew they couldn't micromanage every nook and cranny. Instead, they delegated power to local lords, who ruled their territories semi-independently under the loose oversight of the king. This decentralized approach was great for keeping the empire together, but it also meant that the central authority was about as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. And then there was the matter of succession, which in the Parthian Empire was less about orderly transition and more about who could outmaneuver whom. The Arsacid family tree was a tangled mess of rival branches, each vying for the throne with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. It wasn't uncommon for siblings to face off, each backed by different factions of the nobility, leading to a level of intrigue that would make even the most seasoned political strategists head spin. Forget sibling rivalry over who got the last piece of cake. In Parthia, it was a fight over the crown, with the stakes as high as they come. Now, while the Arsacids were busy playing musical thrones, they also had to navigate the treacherous waters of international diplomacy. Enter Rome, the Parthians' frenemy from across the Mediterranean, with whom they shared a rivalry as old as time. The two empires were like neighbors who couldn't decide whether to borrow a cup of sugar or declare all-out war. On one hand, there were treaties and trade agreements. On the other, bloody battles and territorial disputes. It was a relationship characterized by grudging respect and deep-seated animosity, like two alpha dogs circling each other with teeth bared. One of the most infamous clashes came in 53 BC at the Battle of Kerry, where the Parthians handed the Romans a defeat so humiliating it left a mark on Roman pride as permanent as a tattoo. Led by Crassus, a man whose wealth rivaled that of Jeff Bezos, but whose military acumen could have used a little work, the Romans marched confidently into Parthian territory, only to find themselves outmaneuvered and outmatched. The Parthians, with their cavalry and those pesky Parthian charts, turned the battlefield into a Roman graveyard, capturing the Roman standards and dealing a blow to Roman prestige that echoed through the ages. This victory wasn't just a feather in the Parthian cap. It was a bold statement of power, a declaration that they were a force to be reckoned with. Yet, it was also a reminder of the precarious balance the Parthians had to maintain with their Roman counterparts. For every triumph, there was the looming threat of Roman retaliation, a constant push and pull that defined their diplomatic dance for centuries. But let's not paint the Parthians solely as the underdogs in this geopolitical tug-of-war. They were savvy operators, adept at playing the long game. When faced with Roman aggression, they knew when to fight and when to negotiate, leveraging their position as a buffer state between Rome and the more distant powers of the East. The Parthians, ever the pragmatists, understood that sometimes diplomacy was just another battlefield, where words could wield as much power as swords. Yet, in the grand scheme of things, the Parthian Empire's political saga was as much about internal dynamics as it was about external threats. The constant jockeying for power within the Arsacid dynasty and the intricate web of alliances and rivalries among the nobility created a political landscape that was as unpredictable as it was fascinating. It was a world where fortunes could change with the roll of a dice, where today's ally could become tomorrow's adversary. And amid all this, the question of central versus local control remained a persistent theme. The Parthians' reliance on a feudal system meant that while they could project power across vast distances, they also had to contend with the ambitions of regional rulers who were often more concerned with their own interests than with those of the empire. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required a deft touch and a keen understanding of the political chessboard. So, as we continue to unravel the tapestry of the Parthian Empire, it's clear that their political story is one of complexity and nuance. It's a tale of power and pragmatism, of ambition and intrigue, where the only constant is change. The Parthian Empire may not have been the most stable of regimes, but it was certainly one of the most fascinating, where every twist and turn offered a new glimpse into the art of ruling an empire in an ever-changing world. And just as we begin to grasp the intricacies of Parthian politics, we must keep in mind that the story isn't over yet. There's more drama to unfold, more power struggles to witness, and more political maneuvers to dissect. So, stay tuned as we continue our journey through the annals of Parthian history, where every chapter promises a new revelation in the saga of this remarkable empire. But as the curtain falls on the Parthian Empire's political theatre, a new act begins, one riddled with internal strife and external pressures that would ultimately lead to its unraveling. The 3rd century AD was no friend to the Parthians, with their empire resembling a once majestic tapestry, now fraying at the edges. The Arsacid dynasty, already juggling power like a circus performer with one too many flaming torches, found itself increasingly beleaguered by both the ambitions of its nobility and the machinations of the emerging Sasanian power. Enter the Sasanians, a fresh-faced dynasty with a penchant for grandeur and a taste for conquest. Founded by Ardashir I around AD 224, they were like the new kids on the block. Only this block was the expansive Persian plateau, and they had a serious bone to pick with the Parthians. Think of Ardashir as the entrepreneur with a startup looking to disrupt the old guard. He was the Steve Jobs of ancient Persia, if Steve Jobs had also been handy with a sword. Ardashir's vision was clear: to restore the glory of the ancient Achaemenid Empire and assert Persian dominance once more. The Parthians, meanwhile, were caught in a perfect storm of internal decay and external aggression. The once pragmatic feudal system had become a quagmire of competing interests, with local rulers more interested in their own power plays than the cohesion of the empire. It's the age-old tale of too many cooks spoiling the broth. Only in this case, the broth was an empire, and the cooks were squabbling nobles with armies. Externally, the Romans had never really gotten over the whole Carrhae fiasco. They continued to push against Parthian borders, creating a constant state of tension. The empire was like an overstretched rubber band, ready to snap at any moment. In AD 224, the inevitable happened. The Sasanians, under Ardashir, dealt the final blow, capturing the Parthian capital, Ctesiphon, and effectively ending the Arsacid reign. But let's not write the Parthians off just yet. Sure, their political structure had crumbled faster than a cookie in a toddler's grip, but their cultural and economic legacy was far from forgotten. The Parthians had been the custodians of the Silk Road, the ancient world's version of a global shipping lane, bridging east and west. Their innovations in trade and commerce laid the groundwork for future empires. They were the ones who, quite literally, paved the way for the flow of goods, ideas, and culture, a legacy that the Sasanians were only too eager to inherit and expand upon. In terms of culture, the Parthians were like the original remix artists. They took Greek, Persian, and local influences and blended them into a cultural cocktail that was distinctively Parthian, yet universally appealing. Their artistry in architecture, as seen in the grandiosity of the Takkasra, and their flair for sculpture and decorative arts, left a mark on the cultural landscape that resonated far beyond their political demise. Now, if you've ever wondered why the Parthians didn't get their fair share of the historical spotlight, you're not alone. They were the underdogs sandwiched between two of history's most storied empires, the Greeks and the Romans. It's like being the opening act at a rock concert. No matter how good you are, people tend to remember the headliner. Yet, the Parthians' contributions to art, trade, and military tactics were anything but minor. They were the unsung architects of a cultural and economic bridge that connected continents, their legacy enduring even as their empire fell. Speaking of legacy, it's worth noting that the Parthians' mastery of the Parthian shot, a tactical maneuver that turned retreat into ambush, didn't disappear with the fall of their empire. This technique became a staple of cavalry tactics in the ancient world, a testament to the Parthians' enduring influence on military strategy. It's a reminder that even in decline, their innovations continued to shape the battlefield long after their political power had waned. As the Sasanians rose from the ashes of the Parthian Empire, they built upon this foundation, creating a new Persian empire that would endure for centuries. They adopted and adapted many of the Parthians' cultural achievements, ensuring that the legacy of their predecessors would not be forgotten. The Sasanians were like the savvy investors who saw value in a struggling company and transformed it into a powerhouse, reaping the rewards of innovation and tradition. So, as we wrap up our journey through the annals of the Parthian Empire, what can we glean from their story? For starters, it's a poignant reminder of the cyclical nature of history, how empires rise, peak, and inevitably fall, leaving behind legacies that outlast their political power. The Parthians may not have had the staying power of Rome or the cultural cachet of Greece, but they played a pivotal role in the shaping of ancient history. Their innovations in trade, culture, and military tactics continue to resonate, proving that even in decline, their impact was anything but insignificant. In the end, the Parthian Empire's story is one of resilience and adaptability, a testament to the power of cultural exchange and economic ingenuity. They were the bridge builders of the ancient world, connecting disparate cultures and ideas in a way that set the stage for future empires. So, next time you hear the term Parthian shot, or find yourself marveling at the flow of goods and ideas across continents, spare a thought for the Parthians, the unsung innovators who left an indelible mark on history, proving that even the most underappreciated empires can leave a legacy that stands the test of time. In 1729, the world greeted a baby girl in the not-so-grand German Principality of Stettin, now Szczecin, Poland. Born Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst, she was the kind of child whose destiny seemed to involve more spinning yarn than spinning empires. But history's got a funny way of turning the mundane into the monumental. Fast forward to 1744, and Sophie was on a one-way ticket to the Russian court, a place as foreign to her as a Siberian winter to a sunbathing lizard. Now, if you think your in-laws are tough, wait until you hear about Sophie's new family. Russia's Grand Duke Peter was about as charming as a damp muskrat, and his social skills rivaled those of a potato. Born in 1728, Peter was actually a German by birth too, but he took to Russia like a cat to water. His idea of a good time, playing with toy soldiers, well into his 20s. Peter's eccentricities were as much a fixture of court whispers as the palace walls themselves. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before Sophie became Catherine the Great, She first had to navigate the labyrinthine corridors of Russian customs and power games. Talk about culture shock. Russia in the mid-18th century was a world of icons, incense, and the Orthodox Church, a far cry from the Lutheran faith she grew up with. Yet, Sophie was nothing if not adaptable. By 1745, she traded her Lutheran Bible for an Orthodox one, even though she privately wrote that she did not believe a word of it. Adapt or perish, as they say. This transformation from Sophie to Catherine wasn't just about religious conversion. It was a masterclass in political maneuvering, as she found herself in a snake pit of intrigue where survival depended on both charm and cunning. If Russian politics were a board game, Catherine played it like chess, a few moves ahead, always contemplating the next step while her competitors played checkers. Her marriage to Peter was part of this grand strategy, albeit a move that seemed as appealing as a root canal. Peter, for his part, bumbled through his princely duties with all the grace of a duck on ice. His reign as emperor, though brief, was a comedy of errors. For instance, he was enamored with Prussia and its king, Frederick the Great, to a degree that would make even the most devoted fan blush. He was so into Frederick that when he ascended to the throne in January 1762, one of his first acts was to withdraw Russia from the 7 Years' War, which Russia was actually winning. This bizarre act of bromance had the Russian military's heads spinning faster than a Cossack dance. But let's not forget the elephant, or rather, the German elephant, in the room. Catherine's rise wasn't just about Peter's gaffes. It was about a woman who, despite being a foreigner, understood Russia better than those born to rule it. She networked, she charmed, and she listened. She even learned Russian, which wasn't exactly a walk in the park considering her first lesson was a disaster, leaving her in tears. Yet by the time she was ready to make her move, she could converse fluently, a skill that would prove crucial in rallying support. As for Peter, he unwittingly set the stage for his own downfall. His penchant for military parades and toy soldiers did little to endear him to a court that was already skeptical of his leadership. His policies were as erratic as his personality, swinging from one extreme to another without much consideration for the consequences. Meanwhile, Catherine was building alliances, forming friendships with key military leaders who would later become her strongest supporters. In the grand theatre of history, Peter was the unwitting jester who paved the way for Catherine's star turn. On July 9, 1762, a coup d'etat deposed Peter, and just like that, Catherine became Empress of Russia. It was a bloodless revolution, save for Peter's bruised ego. He was packed off to a country estate, and within a week he was dead, perhaps the only Russian political maneuver that caught Catherine by surprise. So, as Catherine settled into her role as Empress, she wasn't just stepping into a new title. She was stepping into a role she'd been rehearsing for since the day she arrived in Russia. Her early life had taught her the value of adaptability, and her tumultuous marriage taught her the importance of patience and strategy. She might have started as a German princess with a funny-sounding name, but she ended up as one of the most formidable rulers in Russian history. And that's not just great, it's Catherine the Great. Catherine's ascent to power was the kind of political drama that makes modern reality TV look like a sedate game of chess. July 9, 1762 wasn't just another day in the calendar. It was the day Catherine flipped the script on Peter Roman III and turned the Russian power structure on its head. She'd been in Russia for nearly 2 decades by then, and every lesson, every faux pas, and every calculated risk had led to this moment. But let's not romanticize it too much. Her coup was a masterclass in planning and opportunism, not a fairy tale where the prince becomes the princess. The coup was as meticulously planned as a heist in a Hollywood blockbuster. Think less Ocean's 11 and more Catherine's coup crew. Catherine wasn't simply winging it. She had the backing of the Imperial Guard, those elite troops who were more accustomed to parading than plotting. The cost of securing their loyalty. Let's just say she wasn't passing out free vodka. She spread around a hefty 100,000 rubles, equivalent to millions in today's currency. And yet, the real currency Catherine traded in was loyalty and ambition, commodities she had in spades. Her network was a who's who of the Russian elite. Count Grigory Orlov, one of her closest allies and rumored lover, played a pivotal role. He wasn't just a pretty face in a military uniform. He was the charismatic leader who helped rally the troops. Then there was Nikita Panin, a shrewd diplomat with a knack for seeing 3 moves ahead, much like Catherine herself. Together, they formed the backbone of her coup, a group of insiders who knew that Peter's reign was as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Peter, meanwhile, was blissfully unaware that his days on the throne were numbered. He was holed up at his country palace in Oranienbaum, perhaps playing with his toy soldiers or dreaming about reenacting Prussian military maneuvers. His downfall was a tragicomedy, a moment where the absurd collided with the inevitable. When Catherine made her move, Peter was caught off guard, like a deer in the headlights of a speeding political juggernaut. It's said that when the Imperial Guard switched sides, Peter realized he was less popular than a snowstorm in June. There's a certain irony to Peter's undoing. Here was a man who adored all things Prussian, yet it was Russian pragmatism that toppled him. His reign, which had lasted a mere 6 months, ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. Catherine's forces marched into St. Petersburg, the heart of the empire, and proclaimed her empress. Peter, ever the tragic figure, abdicated without much fuss, retreating to Rapture, where he would meet his untimely, and still suspicious, demise shortly after. The immediate challenge Catherine faced was legitimacy. She might have had the crown, but without the people's hearts and minds, she was just another usurper in a long list of Russian rulers who met untimely ends. She needed to establish her rule across a sprawling empire that stretched from the tundras of Siberia to the temperate shores of the Black Sea. This wasn't just about domestic politics. It was about navigating the treacherous waters of international diplomacy, where alliances were as changeable as the Russian weather. Catherine wasted no time in getting to work, showcasing her political savvy by maintaining the status quo and reassuring the nobility that their privileges were safe under her reign. She issued a manifesto to the Russian people, painting herself as the guardian of orthodox values and Russian stability. But behind the rhetoric was a woman who understood that power wasn't just seized. It was maintained through careful governance and savvy public relations. Her first year as empress was spent consolidating power and winning over skeptics. She knew that while the coup secured the throne, it was her policies that would keep her seated on it. Catherine was keenly aware of the power of perception, and she was determined to portray herself as Russia's rightful ruler, not just a usurper in a fancy dress. Catherine's rise to power debunks the myth of the passive princess waiting for a fairy godmother to deliver her destiny. She was a pragmatist, a shrewd operator who understood that in the Game of Thrones, the stakes were life and death. Her coup was a testament to her understanding of Russian politics, her ability to navigate its murky waters, and her determination to write her own destiny. In the grand tapestry of history, Catherine the Great wasn't just an empress. She was a force of nature, a woman who carved her name into the annals of time not through birthright, but through sheer will and intellect. Her story is a reminder that history isn't written by those who wait. It's seized by those with the audacity to act. And Catherine, she acted with the precision of a surgeon, the courage of a lion, and the charm of a diplomat, leaving an indelible mark on Russia and the world. As she settled into her new role, Catherine faced the monumental task of transforming Russia into a modern state, a challenge that would require every ounce of her wit and wisdom. She may have been born Sophie, a minor German princess, but she had become Catherine the Great, a ruler whose legacy would be as vast and complex as the empire she now commanded. The stage was set for a reign that would redefine Russia, and Catherine was more than ready to embrace the challenge. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's much more to this story of ambition, power, and transformation. Stay tuned. As Catherine settled into her new role as empress, she faced the monumental task of transforming Russia from a giant landmass that seemed better suited for medieval folklore into a modern European power. You see, Russia was the kind of place where you could traverse thousands of miles and still be knee-deep in the Middle Ages. Catherine had her work cut out for her, and she knew it. Let's talk domestic policies. Catherine was all about embracing those snazzy Western ideas. She was like a kid in a candy store, but instead of sweets, she was grabbing Enlightenment philosophies off the shelves. Inspired by thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu, she aimed to drag Russia kicking and screaming into the age of reason. Her reign saw the drafting of the Nakaz, a legal document that was supposed to reform the Russian legal system. Spoiler alert, it didn't quite achieve its lofty goals, but hey, at least she was trying. The nakaz called for the abolition of capital punishment and torture, though the Russian countryside was still a place where a good flogging was as common as vodka shots. Speaking of the countryside, let's take a detour into the wild world of Russian serfdom. Catherine had big dreams of modernization, but out in the rural areas, serfs were living lives that would make a Dickens novel look like a fairy tale. Serfs were essentially enslaved peasants, and they made up a whopping 80% of the population. While Catherine was busy rubbing elbows with intellectuals and drafting progressive policies, millions of serfs were still tied to the land in a system that was as outdated as a rotary phone at a tech convention. The disconnect between her ideals and rural realities was like trying to download a video game on dial-up internet, painfully slow and bound to crash. But not all of Catherine's domestic efforts were destined for the dustbin of history. In 1764, she founded the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens, Europe's first state-financed institution for higher education for women. Picture this. In a world where women were often relegated to embroidery and enduring endless lessons on how to faint gracefully, Smolny was a radical leap forward. Catherine understood that educated women could be a powerful force, and she wasn't just schooling them in geography and French. She was schooling them in strategy. The Institute was both progressive and politically savvy, grooming young women who could navigate the complex web of court life and become loyal allies. But let's not sugarcoat it. Catherine's reforms weren't just about altruism. They were as much about securing her power as they were about enlightening the masses. By educating noble women, she was creating a buffer of support around her throne, because nothing says, "I've got your back," like a bunch of well-read women who owe their education to the Empress. It was a calculated move that underscored Catherine's knack for political chess, playing her pieces with precision while her opponents were still learning the rules. While Catherine was busy with social reforms, she didn't forget about the economy. The Russian economy was like a creaky old ship, and she aimed to retrofit it with some modern sails. She introduced currency reform, stabilizing the ruble and encouraging trade. She also founded new towns and encouraged industry, trying to boost Russia's GDP long before that was even a thing. Yet, the challenge was akin to turning a bear into a ballerina, passable, but requiring a lot of finesse and occasional brute force. Let's not forget the irony of it all. Catherine, the woman who was poised to bring Western ideas to the East, was ruling over a country where the majority of people were still living in feudal squalor. Her efforts to modernize were like trying to install Wi-Fi in a place with no electricity. But she was nothing if not tenacious, and her knack for strategic alliances and reforms kept her empire on a path toward progress, albeit a bumpy one. And so, Catherine's reign continued to unfold like a novel with plot twists at every turn. Her determination to modernize Russia was a testament to her vision, but it was also a reminder of the vast chasm between her ideals and the gritty reality of Russian life. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the paradox of Catherine the Great, a ruler whose ambitions were as vast as the empire she sought to transform. So, while Catherine was busy trying to launch Russia into the modern age, she was also eyeing her neighbors with the kind of ambition that would make a real estate mogul blush. Enter the world of Catherine's foreign policy, which was less about polite diplomacy and more about how many pieces of the geopolitical pie she could snag before anyone else noticed. First up, the Russo-Turkish Wars of 1768-1774. Now, if you're imagining Catherine poring over battle maps with a quill in one hand and a shot of vodka in the other, you'd be half right. These wars were about as straightforward as a Russian novel, full of complex characters, unexpected twists, and the occasional existential crisis. But at the heart of it, Catherine had her sights set on the Ottoman Empire, which controlled the coveted Black Sea region. This wasn't just about adding territory to Russia's already ginormous map. It was about access to warm water ports. Imagine owning a beachfront property in the Mediterranean after years of Siberian winters. Yeah, it's that appealing. The war kicked off in 1768 and dragged on for 6 years, a slog that would test Catherine's military grit and strategic patience. It was a classic David versus Goliath scenario, but with cannon, fire, and diplomatic double-dealing. Russia, armed with a newly modernized military thanks to Catherine's reforms, was up against an Ottoman Empire that was, let's say, past its prime, kind of like a once great rock band on a farewell tour. The Russians, under commanders like Pyotr Rumyantsev and Alexei Orlov, were victorious in several crucial battles, including the Battle of Chesma in 1770, which saw the Russian fleet obliterate the Ottomans in the Aegean Sea. Think of it as a naval version of a fireworks show, but with way more at stake. This wasn't just about brute force, though. Catherine was also playing a diplomatic game worthy of a chess grandmaster. She had her eyes on Crimea, a strategic jewel that would cement Russian dominance in the Black Sea. The Treaty of Kusut-Kainaka in 1774 was the cherry on top of her victory sundae. Not only did it grant Russia access to the Black Sea, but it also allowed the Crimean Khanate nominal independence, an independence as genuine as a $3 bill. By 1783, Catherine annexed Crimea outright, proving that she could play the long game with the best of them. But wait, there's more. While Catherine was redrawing maps, she was also penning letters to some of the Enlightenment's biggest rock stars. Her correspondence with Voltaire was the 18th century equivalent of a Twitter bromance, with Catherine eagerly discussing philosophy and governance with the French thinker. Voltaire, ever the fan of irony, dubbed her the Star of the North. It was a relationship that blended intellectual admiration with a dash of flattery, as Catherine sought to brand herself as an enlightened ruler in the eyes of Europe. Yet, the moniker of enlightened despot is a bit of a double-edged sword. Sure, Catherine was all about the Enlightenment when it suited her. She even flirted with the idea of freeing the serfs, though that was about as likely as a bear-performing ballet. The reality was a bit grittier. Her reign was marked by expansionist policies that often prioritized power over principle. The annexation of Crimea, while a geopolitical masterstroke, was hardly an exercise in benevolent governance. It was realpolitik at its finest, driven by strategic necessity and a relentless pursuit of Russian hegemony. The myth of the enlightened despot glosses over the fact that Catherine's rule was as much about pragmatism as it was about philosophy. She was a ruler who understood the art of balancing ideals with the harsh realities of power. Her foreign policy was a testament to this balancing act, a mix of military might, diplomatic finesse, and a touch of Enlightenment flair. Catherine knew that to maintain her empire's power, she had to play the game of international politics with the skill of a seasoned gambler. And so, as Catherine continued to expand her realm and her influence, she remained a figure of contradictions, a ruler who straddled the line between enlightened ambitions and despotic realities. Her reign was a tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, intellect, and a relentless drive for power. It's a story that reminds us that history is rarely black and white, but rather a rich palette of grays, with Catherine painting her legacy in bold, sometimes controversial strokes. As we leave Catherine plotting her next move on the global chessboard, it's clear that her story is far from over. Her ambitions were as vast as the empire she governed, and her legacy as complex as the time she lived in. So stay tuned as we continue to explore the life of Catherine the Great, a ruler whose name still echoes through the corridors of history, as formidable and fascinating as ever. As we continue this roller coaster ride through Catherine the Great's reign, it's clear her ambitions were as expansive as Russia's borders. And let's face it, for a woman who started her life in a tiny German principality, she sure had a knack for thinking big. But while Catherine was busy redrawing maps and dabbling in diplomacy with a flair that would make Machiavelli proud, she was also shaping a legacy that's as complex as a Russian nesting doll, layer upon layer of myth and reality. Now, let's dive into the juicy bits of Catherine's life that history buffs love to gossip about, her infamous love affairs. Ah, yes, the romantic escapades of Catherine the Great. It's the stuff of legend, or at least of scandalous court whispers. Catherine had a heart as big as her empire, and she wasn't shy about sharing it. Over the course of her life, she had about a dozen favorites. Think of them as boyfriends with benefits. These weren't just pretty faces lounging around the Winter Palace. Many were key political players. Take Grigory Potemkin, for example. The man was more than just a lover. He was an architect of Catherine's vision for Russia's expansion. Together, they were like the original power couple, minus the Instagram posts. But here's the catch. For all the tales of her romantic dalliances, Catherine wasn't simply a love-struck empress. These relationships were strategic, a blend of personal affection and political maneuvering. Her lovers often served crucial roles in her court, acting as advisors, military leaders, and confidants. In fact, Potemkin was instrumental in the annexation of Crimea. So, while the romanticized image of Catherine involves moonlit trysts and passionate letters, the reality was more akin to a savvy game of political chess, with each relationship a calculated move on the board. Speaking of romanticized images, let's tackle the elephant in the room, or rather, the horse. Yes, the infamous rumor about Catherine's affection for equine companions. Spoiler alert. This is pure fiction, folks. The legend of Catherine and the horse is an old wives' tale spun from misogyny and political slander, with no basis in historical fact. It's a reminder that even centuries ago, powerful women were often reduced to salacious gossip when their true accomplishments were too intimidating to handle. So, with her personal life as tangled as a ball of yarn, Catherine continued to focus on her legacy, one she was determined to craft with the precision of a master sculptor. Her impact on Russian culture was as profound as her political achievements. She was a patron of the arts, establishing the Hermitage as one of the world's great museums. Under her reign, the Russian Enlightenment flourished, as she invited artists, scientists, and philosophers to her court, transforming St. Petersburg into a beacon of culture and intellectual thought. But let's not get too dreamy-eyed here. For all her cultural contributions, Catherine's rule wasn't a utopia of art and enlightenment. The ironies of her reign are as plentiful as the treasures in the Hermitage. While she championed the Enlightenment, Russia remained a land of stark contrasts, with the opulence of the court worlds apart from the poverty of the peasantry. The Pugachev rebellion from 1773 to 1775 showcased this divide in brutal fashion. Yemelyan Pugachev, a disaffected Cossack, led a massive peasant uprising against the Empress's rule, an event that shook the very foundations of her empire. The rebellion was eventually crushed, but it was a stark reminder that beneath the glittering surface of Catherine's Russia lay simmering discontent. The truth is, Catherine's reign was a balancing act of contradictions. She was a progressive in some ways, a champion of education and culture, but a conservative in others, maintaining the rigid social hierarchies that kept the serfs in bondage. It's the classic case of the ruler who wants to have her cake and eat it too, or perhaps, in Catherine's case, her caviar. As Catherine's life drew to a close in 1796, she left behind an empire transformed, yet still grappling with the issues of modernization and social inequality. Her death marked the end of an era, but her legacy was just beginning to take shape. She was succeeded by her son, Paul I, a man who seemed to inherit none of his mother's political savvy and all of her stubbornness. Paul's reign would be short-lived and tumultuous, a testament to the fact that even the greatest legacies can be precarious. So how do we sum up Catherine the Great? Was she truly great, or is that just a catchy moniker? Well, like all historical narratives, the answer isn't black and white. Catherine was a ruler of immense ambition and capability, a woman who defied the odds to become one of the most powerful figures of her time. She was both enlightened and autocratic, a patron of the arts and a pragmatist of power. Her reign was a tapestry woven from triumphs and tragedies, progress and paradox. Catherine's policies laid the groundwork for Russia's emergence as a major European power, but they also left a legacy of inequality and unrest that would haunt the empire for decades. Her story is a reminder that history isn't just a collection of dates and events. It's a complex mosaic of human experience, shaped by ambition, intellect, and the relentless march of time. In the end, Catherine the Great was a ruler who defied easy categorization. Her life was a testament to the power of determination and vision, a reminder that history is made by those bold enough to seize it. So as we bid farewell to this chapter of Russian history, let's remember Catherine not just for the myths and legends, but for the indelible mark she left on the world, a legacy as vast and varied as the empire she once commanded. And with that, we close the book on one of history's most fascinating figures, leaving us to ponder what truly makes a ruler great. You wake up to the sound of 100 Byzantine roosters crowing, each strutting about as if they personally invented the concept of morning. Welcome to the Byzantine Empire, circa the 9th century, a place where your day begins not with a whimper, but with the full-on fanfare of court life. As a member of the Byzantine aristocracy, you're about to embark on a crash course in what it means to be part of this fabulously complex and often bewildering society. But first, let's talk breakfast. Forget about grabbing a quick toast. Here, breakfast is a delicate dance of flavors designed to remind you that you're a cut above the barbarians at the gates. You're looking at a table adorned with honey-soaked breads, cheeses, and perhaps a spoonful of caviar if you're feeling particularly grand. Byzantine cuisine was all about showing off, blending the finest ingredients from across the empire. After all, this is a world where the food on your plate is as much a statement of power as the crown on your head. Now, let's get into the wardrobe situation. You're not just getting dressed. You're darning an entire economic system. Start with your undergarments, usually a simple tunic. But from there, things get opulent. You layer on the silk, the fabric that whispers wealth with every swish. Manufactured mostly in Constantinople, the silk industry was a tightly guarded secret, the 9th century equivalent of having the nuclear codes. Silk production was so crucial to the economy that laws existed to control its trade, and smuggling silkworms could earn you a one-way ticket to a very unpleasant conversation with the emperor. As you pile on these luxurious layers, remember, each one is a badge of your status. The Byzantines had an obsession with appearance that makes modern fashionistas look like they're wearing burlap sacks. Your clothing isn't just about keeping warm. It's a visual resume, a non-verbal LinkedIn profile. The more elaborate your attire, the higher your status. You're not just wearing clothes, you're wearing politics. Speaking of politics, the Byzantine court is a hotbed of intrigue, where alliances are woven as intricately as your silk garments. The court's social rituals are a masterclass in etiquette. Navigating them requires more than just a passing knowledge of who's who. You need a PhD in Byzantine social dynamics. The wrong gesture, the incorrect form of address, and you could find yourself on the social equivalent of a deserted island, far from the power centers you aspire to influence. Your morning routine isn't just about personal grooming. It's a daily performance where the stakes are high. The court dances you'll see later aren't just entertainment. They are political theater. Status is everything here, and getting it right is crucial. You're not just dressing for success. You're dressing to survive. So, as you slip into those impossibly ornate shoes, remember, you're not just a participant in the Byzantine court. You're part of a spectacle where every move is scrutinized. The day has only just begun, but already you're juggling the complexities of fashion, politics, and power. Keep your wits about you, because in this world, appearances don't just matter. They're everything. Now that you're fabulously draped in Byzantine bling, it's time to dive headfirst into the social whirlpool that is the imperial court. As you wander through the palace's marble halls, the anticipation crackles in the air like static electricity. You're en route to a spectacle that's half political summit, half dance-off, and 100% Byzantine extravaganza. If you think courtly dances are all about grace and elegance, prepare to have your expectations pirouetted right out the window. Enter the grand hall, where the Byzantine court gathers not just to cut a rug, but to weave an intricate tapestry of alliances, rivalries, and ambitions. This is where the real power plays unfold, and dancing is the language everyone speaks. But don't be fooled into thinking this is anything like a modern nightclub. Forget about freestyle moves. Here, every step is as choreographed as a military parade, and just as strategic. Let's talk about the Sirtos, the star of the Byzantine dance repertoire. This ancient Greek dance, still performed today, involves dancers holding hands and moving in a serpentine line. It's a bit like the Macarena, if the Macarena were about asserting your social status, and less about wedding reception cringe. In the Byzantine court, the Sirtos isn't just a dance. It's a display of unity and continuity, a living link to the empire's Hellenistic past. And who's the headliner of this dance party? None other than the emperor himself, the original rock star of the Byzantine dance floor. Picture him, decked out in a robe so gold it makes Vegas look understated, leading the procession with the kind of flair that makes everyone else's attempts at dancing look like they're stomping grapes. The emperor's every move is watched, analyzed, and interpreted like he's a one-man Dow Jones of Byzantine politics. If he's pleased with your dance moves, it might just mean a new title or a bit more land. If not, well, let's just say you might want to keep your bags packed. Now, let's burst a few bubbles about the supposed grace of Byzantine dancers. Sure, the mosaics and frescoes depict them as paragons of elegance, but reality check. The average courtier had all the coordination of a newborn giraffe. These dances were more about who you were dancing with, and less about how well you were doing it. Think of it as a social media feed, more about the curated image than the messy reality. This is a court where your social status is a jittery thing, like a cat on a heart tin roof. The dances are a chance to solidify your standing, but also a minefield of faux pas. Flub the steps, and you might as well have declared your allegiance to a rival faction. Here, even your missteps are political statements. And speaking of missteps, let's talk about the economic dance that keeps this whole affair spinning. The Byzantine Empire, after all, didn't run on good vibes alone. The grandeur of these events was underpinned by a robust economy, fueled by trade, taxes, and a little bit of good old-fashioned imperial conquest. Silk, spices, and other luxury goods flowed into Constantinople, swelling the imperial coffers and allowing the court to throw these lavish shindigs. It's a heady mix of wealth and spectacle, where the cost of a single event could equal the GDP of a small principality. But don't let the opulence fool you. Beneath the glittering surface lies a world of intrigue and danger. Alliances are as fragile as the emperor's porcelain tea set, and one wrong move on the dance floor or the political arena could see your fortunes crumble faster than a Byzantine breadstick. So, as you glide or stumble through this courtly dance, remember, it's not just a matter of stepping in time. Here, every movement is a negotiation, every partner a potential ally or adversary. The day is far from over, and the dance of Byzantine politics continues, as intricate and as perilous as the steps of the Syrtos itself. Keep your wits sharp and your feet sharper, because in this world everyone's dancing, but not everyone's in step. So, as you navigate the intricate dance of Byzantine court politics, you might notice your stomach is starting to rumble louder than the emperor's fanfare. Fear not, because lunchtime in Byzantium is about to turn into a full-blown spectacle. Think less, grab a sandwich, and more, prepare for a culinary opera. Here, a meal isn't just an opportunity to refill the tank. It's a grand display of wealth and a strategic exercise in culinary diplomacy. The Byzantine lunch table is a battleground where fortunes are made and broken, and it's all dressed up in spices and silks. Picture this, an enormous banquet hall lined with tables groaning under the weight of dishes that would put a Michelin-starred restaurant to shame. We're talking roasted peacocks, their feathers painstakingly reattached for maximum visual impact. Because why serve something in a boring old platter when you can present it as a work of art? But let's not kid ourselves. A feast like this doesn't come cheap. The Byzantines had a taste for the exotic, and their menus featured spices from the far reaches of the known world. Nutmeg from the Banda Islands, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, and black pepper from the Malabar coast. All of these were worth their weight in gold, literally. In fact, during the height of Byzantine trade, a pound of pepper could cost as much as a slave. Talk about seasoning your food with a side of moral quandary. The emperor's lunch table wasn't just about food. It was about flexing imperial muscle. Each dish served was a testament to the empire's far-reaching trade networks and its ability to access the rarest of ingredients. The Byzantine Empire was the original melting pot, with influences from Persia, the Arab world, and even the distant lands of China and India, thanks to the sprawling Silk Road. This wasn't just cultural appropriation, it was cultural assimilation on a platter. Let's dig a little deeper into the economic engine that made these feasts possible. Byzantium's strategic position at the crossroads of Europe and Asia made it a hotbed of trade, and the imperial treasury was filled with the spoils of this geographic jackpot. The state had its hands in every part, taxing goods that passed through Constantinople while simultaneously engaging in direct trade. The empire's economy was a complex beast, part free market, part command economy, and entirely Byzantine. As you sit down to this opulent spread, remember that every bite you take is a mini political statement. The Byzantines understood the power of food as a tool of diplomacy long before modern states started hosting awkward state dinners. Inviting a foreign dignitary to a meal wasn't just about feeding them. It was about showcasing the empire's sophistication, its wealth, and its culinary prowess. Each dish was a message, a flavorful communique that said, "See what we can do." Perhaps you'd like to trade with us, or maybe think twice before invading. But the lunch table wasn't all serious business. There were lighter moments, too, like the time Emperor Basil I, in a bid to impress or perhaps shock his guests, had the entire dining room floor covered in roses. Imagine the scent. It was said that the rose petals were knee-deep, turning the room into an aromatic wonderland. If you're thinking that sounds a tad excessive, you're not wrong. But in Byzantium, excess was the name of the game. Now, let's debunk a myth while we're at it. The romanticized vision of Byzantine banquets often suggests a sense of Epicurean harmony, but the reality was far more chaotic. The dining etiquette was a minefield. Simply put, it was a social game of musical chairs where your seat determined your rank and influence. Sit too close to the emperor, and you might be seen as overly ambitious. Too far, and you could fade into irrelevance faster than leftover fish sauce. And speaking of fish sauce, let's take a moment to appreciate garum. This fermented fish condiment was a staple in Byzantine cuisine, adding a savory depth to dishes that was either divine or diabolical, depending on who you ask. It's a precursor to modern-day Worcestershire sauce, and it was so beloved that it had its own economic implications. Production centers for garum were set up across the empire, and the best varieties were as prized as the finest wines. Behind the scenes, the logistics of orchestrating these feasts were nothing short of Herculean. The palace staff was a small army dedicated to ensuring everything ran smoothly, from the cooks laboring over the hearths to the servants polishing the silver. It was a well-oiled machine, driven by the knowledge that a single misstep, like serving a dish cold or forgetting to refill a goblet, could lead to a swift fall from grace. So, as you savor every bite of this Byzantine banquet, remember that you're not just eating. You're participating in a theatrical production where food, power, and prestige are the main ingredients. The empire's influence is as layered as the flaky pastries on your plate, each bite a reminder of the complex web of politics and trade that sustains the grandeur around you. But don't get too comfortable. The day is far from over, and the next act in this Byzantine drama is about to begin. And so, with your stomach satisfied, and your senses overwhelmed by the aromatic symphony of Byzantine culinary excess, it's time to shuffle along to the next act in this imperial play, the political dance of the Byzantine court. And no, I'm not just talking about the literal kind, although there will be plenty of that too. In Byzantium, the afternoon is when the court's social machinery really gets its gears grinding, where allegiances are as fickle as a breeze off the Bosporus. As you make your way through the labyrinthine corridors of the great palace, you can almost hear the echoes of whispered conspiracies blending with the sound of harp strings. Remember, this is a place where the walls have ears, and probably a few eyes, too. The Byzantine court wasn't just the heart of the empire, it was its most dangerous game of chess. Let's start with the court hierarchy, a structure as complex as the emperor's wardrobe, and just as colorful. At the top sits the emperor, of course, a living embodiment of divine authority, theoretically untouchable, and yet constantly at risk of being touched in all the wrong ways by political turmoil. Below him is a cascade of titles that would make even the most enthusiastic Game of Thrones fans head spin. The Protovisharios, responsible for the imperial wardrobe, the Logothetes, overseeing finance and administration, and of course, the ever-intriguing eunuchs, who wielded power in ways that belie their unfortunate circumstances. Now, you might be thinking, eunuchs, really? Yes, indeed. These were men who, due to their unique status, were seen as trustworthy by the emperor. After all, they had no children to whom they could pass on power or wealth. Some eunuchs wielded more influence than generals, and were often the emperor's closest advisors. The idea was that without pesky family ties to complicate things, they could focus solely on the empire's needs, or, on their own needs, depending on the day. But let's not pretend that court life was all about titles and prestige. The Byzantine court was a hotbed of intrigue where backstabbing was practically an Olympic sport. And speaking of Olympians, the courtiers had to perform like athletes in an unending marathon of favor currying. Every nod, smile, and dance step was a calculated move. Now, about this dancing. The afternoon court gatherings often featured what we might call networking events. But instead of business cards, you exchanged veiled threats and promises while trying not to trip over your robes. The dances were a metaphor for the political landscape, complex, layered, and full of opportunities to outmaneuver your rivals. It was less about how gracefully you could move, and more about who you could move with. The dance floor was a place where alliances were formed and shattered in the blink of an eye. Picture the emperor leading a procession, his every step setting the tone for the court's mood. Around him, nobles and courtiers fluttered, each trying to catch his eye or the eye of someone who could whisper in his ear. Here, a misstep could mean more than a bruised ego. It could mean the loss of power, or worse, a swift exit from the court's favor. And let's not forget the economic context underpinning this glittering facade. The Byzantine economy was a complex beast, reliant on a delicate balance of trade and taxation. The empire's wealth allowed for these grand displays of power, but it was a double-edged sword. The more elaborate the court life, the more resources were drained from the imperial treasury, leading to moments of fiscal crisis that could topple even the most stable reigns. In this world, the dance was also a tool for maintaining social order. The rigid hierarchy was reflected in the dance formations, with the most important figures at the center and lesser nobles on the periphery. It was a visible reminder of one's place in the grand scheme of things, a literal dance of power that kept everyone in line, until someone decided they wanted to rewrite the choreography. Of course, not everyone was dancing for the emperor's favor. Some courtiers had their eyes set on more personal goals, like revenge. Grudges were as much a part of the court as the marble columns, and vendettas could simmer for years before boiling over. A whispered word here, a discreet bribe there, and suddenly you might find yourself on the wrong side of a coup. But let's not romanticize the intrigue too much. Beneath the veneer of elegance, court life could be downright brutal. The Byzantine court was a pressure cooker where the stakes were high and the rewards enormous, but so were the risks. One miscalculation, one moment of weakness, and you could find yourself disgraced, exiled, or worse. And yet, for all its dangers, the allure of the court was undeniable. It was a place where power could be seized in an instant, where fortunes were made and lost with the flick of a wrist. The courtiers who thrived here were not just politicians, they were performers, each playing a role in a drama that was as captivating as it was perilous. So, as you watch the court dance its intricate ballet of power, remember that every step is a negotiation, every glance a potential alliance. The afternoon may be winding down, but the dance of Byzantine politics never truly ends. In this world, the music plays on, and the dance floor is never empty. Stay light on your feet and keep your eyes open. After all, in the Byzantine court, the next move could be yours. As the sun dips below the horizon and the air fills with the scent of incense and intrigue, the Byzantine court readies itself for the evening's piece de resistance, the gala. This isn't just a party, it's the grand finale of a day spent in the pressure cooker of imperial politics and fashion. Picture a Hollywood awards show, but with more sequins and significantly higher stakes. This is where alliances are sealed with a dance, rivalries are masked with polite smiles, and the social ladder is a slippery dance floor. The evening gala is the ultimate Byzantine spectacle, a shimmering mirage of power and prestige. Here, the elite gather in their most extravagant attire, each outfit more of a statement piece than the last. We're talking robes so encrusted with jewels they could double as body armor. If peacocks could wear clothes, they'd be taking notes. This is more than just a fashion show, though it's a census of the empire's movers and shakers, a who's who of Byzantine high society. Now, let's talk numbers because, in Byzantium, the devil's in the details and the price tags. The cost of one of these galas could rival the annual budget of a small city-state. We're looking at gold-threaded tapestries draping the walls, tables laden with silver platters, and enough exotic spices in the air to make your eyes water. If you thought the afternoon dance was extravagant, the evening gala is like turning that up to 11. But this isn't just a frivolous display of wealth. Oh no, it's all about politics. The gala is where the day's whisperings and strategic maneuvers get put to the test. Remember that new alliance you were angling for during lunch. Time to see if it holds up under the chandelier's gleam. The emperor, ever the ringmaster, presides over the evening with the nonchalance of someone who knows every move is being watched. To dance with him is to be anointed with favor. To be ignored is to start composing your social obituary. Now, let's debunk a few myths about these Byzantine soirees. Pop culture often paints them as elegant affairs full of graceful courtiers gliding effortlessly across polished marble floors. The reality, more like a high-stakes game of political twister. Sure, The mosaics show dancers who look like they could moonlight as prima ballerinas, but the truth is, many of them were less swan-leg and more three-legged race. The real grace was in the maneuvering, not the movement. The gala is also a microcosm of the Byzantine economy. All this opulence isn't just for show, it's a tangible demonstration of the empire's economic might. Let's talk economics. The Byzantine Empire at its height controlled key trade routes, channeling goods from the east and west through Constantinople's bustling ports. The city's marketplace, the Forum, was a hub of activity where merchants from across the known world haggled over silk, spices, and precious metals. The empire's ability to throw such lavish events was a direct result of this vibrant trade network. But let's not sugarcoat it. The economy was a double-edged sword. The very wealth that funded these dazzling galas also fueled corruption and power struggles. The Byzantine court was a breeding ground for graft, where officials skimmed off the top, and where a well-placed bribe could make all the difference in securing a coveted court position. It's like the ultimate game of Monopoly, except, instead of boardwalk, you're gunning for the role of Lagertheat's Drama, the master of the imperial post. And let's not forget the role of women in this glittering tableau. Byzantine women, particularly those at court, wielded significant influence. Empresses like Theodora and Irene didn't just sit on the sidelines. They played the game as fiercely as any man. Theodora, for instance, began life as the daughter of a bear trainer and ended up co-ruling the empire. These women were the original power brokers, their salons the venues for behind-the-scenes scheming and strategy sessions that could rival any boardroom. As the evening wears on, the gala becomes a living tapestry of Byzantine society. Every interaction is a potential alliance, every compliment a veiled promise or threat. It's like a chess game where the pieces are constantly in motion and the rules are as fluid as the wine in your goblet. The stakes are high, and the consequences of a misstep could be dire, but the rewards for those who play the game well are immense. But let's wrap up with some myth-busting about the Byzantine court. The romantic image of a court full of noble, gallant individuals is just that, a romantic image. The reality was a dog-eat-dog world where survival depended as much on cunning as on birthright. The Byzantine court was a crucible of ambition and intrigue, where the glittering facade masked a cutthroat world of political maneuvering. The opulence was real, but so were the dangers hiding in the shadows. So, as the gala winds down and the courtiers disperse into the night, remember that beneath the surface of this dazzling spectacle lies a complex web of power and influence. The Byzantine Empire was a force to be reckoned with, its court a microcosm of the larger world. The lessons learned here echo through history. Power is as much about perception as reality, and those who can navigate the dance of politics, fashion, and diplomacy can change the course of empires. And with that, dear listener, you have danced your way through a day in the life of the Byzantine court. From the morning's breakfast rituals to the evening's grand gala, you've witnessed the intricate choreography of an empire at its height. It's a world where appearances are everything, where every gesture counts, and where the dance never truly ends. So, as you lay your head down tonight, remember, in the Byzantine world, the music may stop, but the dance of history continues on, a mesmerizing waltz through time. The ancient Thracians were the kind of neighbors who'd throw a party that made even the rowdy Greeks and Romans raise an eyebrow. Nestled in the lands that we now know as Bulgaria, Romania, and parts of Turkey, the Thracians had a flair for the dramatic long before anyone knew what a toga was. Their geography was a mixed bag of rugged hills and fertile plains, which meant they had to be as tough as the land they lived on. These folks were less about lounging in marble courtyards and more about setting up shop on hilltops, where the view was great but the commute was a nightmare. Forget the toga-clad serenity of a Roman villa. The Thracians preferred their settlements perched high and mighty, like a fortress with a panoramic view. And let's talk about wine, a Thracian staple that could humble even Dionysus. They weren't just casual sippers. They were enthusiastic connoisseurs, which is a fancy way of saying they really liked their wine. In fact, their love for the grape was so legendary that they inspired myths about Dionysus himself, the Greek god of wine and revelry. No small feat when your drinking habits become the stuff of legend. But the Thracians were more than just wine enthusiasts. They had a knack for being both fiercely independent and inconveniently located. with the Greeks to the south and the Romans knocking on the door. Thrace was like that prime piece of real estate everyone wanted, but no one could quite conquer. They were traders and warriors, often hired as mercenaries by the very empires that sought to control them. Talk about playing both sides. Thracians excelled at it. Their society was a patchwork of tribes, each with its own leadership and customs. Unlike the centralized powers of Rome and Greece, Thracian tribes were more like a jigsaw puzzle, each piece fitting into the larger picture, but maintaining its own unique shape. This decentralized structure was both a strength and a weakness. It made them resilient to external control, but also meant they spent a lot of time squabbling amongst themselves. Think of it like a family reunion with too much wine and too many opinions. And let's not forget the Thracian warriors, famed for their ferocity and skill. They made a name for themselves as formidable foes, skilled in the art of cavalry warfare. Their armor was more practical than ornamental, designed for speed and agility rather than show. The Thracians were the ancient world's equivalent of a biker gang, rough around the edges, but undeniably effective when it came to getting things done. Despite their rough-and-tumble reputation, the Thracians had a rich culture that influenced their more civilized neighbors. Their music, particularly the use of lyres and flutes, was noted by the Greeks, who borrowed more than a few tunes. And while their language remains largely a mystery, the Thracians left behind enough artifacts to keep archaeologists busy and historians scratching their heads. So, why do the Thracians matter? Well, apart from their significant contributions to wine culture, something the modern world can definitely appreciate, they were a testament to the power of adaptation and resilience. While they might not have built sprawling empires, their ability to thrive in the face of constant pressure from larger powers is nothing short of remarkable. They were the scrappy underdogs of ancient history, and who doesn't love a good underdog story? In a world dominated by the grand narratives of Rome and Greece, the Thracians remind us that history's side characters often have the most interesting stories. They were the unsung heroes of ancient Europe, living on their own terms, and leaving just enough of a mark to make us wonder what could have been if they'd had a better PR team. So, the next time you enjoy a glass of wine, raise a toast to the Thracians. Because, let's be honest, they're probably the reason you're sipping that glass in the first place. Now, if you're picturing the Thracians as a bunch of tipsy warriors staggering into battle with a goblet in one hand and a sword in the other, hold up. Their reputation as fierce warriors wasn't just some ancient marketing ploy. These folks were serious about their fighting skills, and they were anything but sloppy. We're talking about the kind of military prowess that made the Greeks and Romans sit up and take notice. Not an easy feat when you're dealing with societies that practically invented the concept of military discipline. The Thracians were the original mercenaries, long before it became trendy to hire out your sword for a bit of extra cash. Picture this. It's the 5th century BCE, and you're a Greek general looking to bolster your ranks. Who do you call? The Thracians, of course. These guys were the ancient world's equivalent of special forces. They had a knack for cavalry warfare, mastering the art of swift, hit-and-run tactics that left their enemies both confused and considerably fewer in number. And let's talk about their weaponry. Forget the flashy, unwieldy swords you see in Hollywood epics. The Thracians were all about the falx, a wickedly curved blade that could slice through armor like a hot knife through butter. This weapon was so effective that it made its way into Roman military ranks after the Romans got over the shock of seeing it in action, of course. They even had to redesign their helmets to withstand the falx's devastating blows. Now, that's what I call leaving a mark. Their prowess wasn't limited to the battlefield, though. The Thracians were strategic thinkers, adept at using their rugged terrain to their advantage. Their homeland was a natural fortress, full of hills and forests that provided perfect cover for ambushes. They could disappear into the landscape and re-emerge where their enemies least expected them. It's a bit like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. Good luck with that. Now, here's the juicy part. While they were busy making a name for themselves as some of the fiercest warriors around, the Thracians were also playing a political game that would make Machiavelli proud. They hired themselves out as mercenaries to the highest bidder, whether Greek or Roman, often fighting for the very powers that sought to control them. And they weren't cheap. The going rate for a Thracian warrior was no small change. but the investment paid off. Their reputation as both brutal and effective meant that whoever had them on their side had a significant edge. And speaking of reputations, let's not forget the myths that surrounded these enigmatic warriors. They were often painted as bloodthirsty barbarians by their more civilized neighbors, but this was more a case of ancient propaganda than reality. Sure, they were fearsome, but they also had a strong code of honor and a deep sense of loyalty to their own tribes. Their ferocity in battle was matched only by their cunning, making them both feared and respected. They were the real-life versions of those Game of Thrones characters who seemed to have 9 lives and a penchant for outsmarting everyone around them. It's no surprise, then, that the Thracians left a lasting impression on the ancient world. They were the kind of warriors you'd want on your side in a fight, and the last people you'd want to face across the battlefield. Despite their fearsome reputation, they were more than just muscle. They had a rich culture, a strategic mind, and an adaptability that allowed them to survive in a world where being conquered was often just a matter of time. But just like any good story, the Thracians' tale doesn't end here. They were players in a much larger game, caught between the ambitions of empires that would shape the course of history. So, as we raise our glasses to these formidable fighters, remember that their legacy was about more than just their martial prowess. They were a testament to the power of resilience, adaptation, and the kind of cunning that lets the underdog come out on top, at least for a while. Stay tuned, because the Thracians have more surprises up their sleeves, and our historical journey is far from over. Now, if you're wondering how these fierce Thracian warriors managed to fund their escapades, grab your ancient world calculator, because we're diving into their economic life, something as rich and layered as their gold mines. Yep, you heard right. The Thracians were sitting on a treasure trove of gold and silver, and not in a figurative sense. We're talking about literal mines that had neighboring powers drooling at the prospect of riches. It wasn't just their military prowess that made them a hot commodity. It was their land's natural resources. Let's set the scene. Thrace was strategically positioned at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, making it the Switzerland of its day in terms of banking on trade. With the Black Sea to the east and the Aegean to the south, they were perfectly poised to control trade routes that connected the Greek world to the bustling economies of the east. Think of them as the ancient world's FedEx, but with a bit more bling and a lot more bargaining on horseback. Their wealth wasn't just a happy accident, though Thracian tribes were savvy traders, and they knew how to leverage their resources. Gold and silver were the headliners, but they also dealt in copper, iron, and timber. These weren't just commodities, they were currency, valuable enough to make even the most stoic Roman senator sit up and take notice. They exported raw materials like a kid trading baseball cards, with the added bonus that these cards could build empires or topple them. But it wasn't just about what they had, it was about where they were. Their geographical position made them gatekeepers of sorts, and they used this to their advantage. The Thracians were the ultimate middlemen, charging tolls for the goods that passed through their lands. This wasn't just a side hustle, it was big business. Imagine a toll road where instead of a few bucks, you're paying in gold ingots or amphorae full of wine. You can bet your bottom denarius that the Thracians had this system down to a fine art. Speaking of wine, because who doesn't love a good grape story, Thrace's vineyards were legendary. Their wine was more than just a drink. It was a trade good that could be swapped, sold, or gifted to faster alliances. And don't think for a second that this was the kind of swill you'd find at a college party. This was top-shelf stuff, aged to perfection in ceramic jars, and sought after by the who's who of the ancient world. It was a liquid asset in every sense of the word. Now, here's where things get spicy. All this wealth didn't just attract trade partners. It also drew in would-be conquerors like moths to a flame. The Thracians were caught in a perpetual tug-of-war with their neighbors, mostly because everyone wanted a piece of their golden pie. The Greeks, the Persians, the Macedonians, and eventually the Romans all tried their hand at seizing Thracian wealth. It was the ancient equivalent of a hostile takeover, except with more swords and fewer board meetings. This constant struggle meant that the Thracians had to be as shrewd in diplomacy as they were in business. They played their cards close to the chest, forming alliances when it suited them and breaking them just as quickly when the winds changed. Their tribal structure might have seemed chaotic, but it allowed for a flexibility that centralized powers like Rome couldn't match. They were like cats, aloof and independent, yet always landing on their feet. Of course, with great wealth came great responsibility, or at least the need to protect it. The Thracians invested heavily in their military, not just for offensive power, but as a defensive measure to secure their economic interests. Their warriors weren't just muscle, they were an essential part of their economic strategy. Think of them as the original security detail, ensuring that all those gold mines and trade routes stayed firmly under Thracian control. But let's not romanticize it too much. While the wealth brought prosperity, it also fueled internal strife. Tribal rivalries were exacerbated by the influx of wealth, leading to power struggles that could turn bloody. It was a double-edged sword, much like the ones they wielded in battle. The Thracians were caught in a cycle of wealth and warfare, with neither one allowing them to fully break free from the other. In the end, the Thracians' economic prowess was both their blessing and their curse. It enabled them to maintain a degree of autonomy in a world that was rapidly being carved up by empires, but it also made them a target. Their story is a reminder that wealth, while a powerful tool, can be a precarious balancing act, especially when you're living in a neighborhood where everyone covets your treasures. As we wrap up this chapter of our Thracian tale, it's clear that their legacy is as much about economics as it is about war. They were traders, miners, and warriors all rolled into one, navigating a complex web of alliances and enmities that would challenge even the most seasoned diplomat. So, the next time you find yourself at a crossroads, be it metaphorical or literal, spare a thought for the Thracians, who turned their strategic position into a thriving, albeit tumultuous, economy. Stay tuned, because the Thracian saga is far from over, and there are still plenty of twists and turns in this ancient drama. And speaking of twists and turns, let's dive headfirst into the swirling cauldron of Thracian mythology and religion, an arena where ritual and reality tangoed with a complexity that would make even the most seasoned historian's head spin. Buckle up, because we're about to unravel the threads of a belief system that left a lasting imprint on Greek and Roman culture, all while keeping a few secrets up its mystical sleeves. Thracian mythology was a wild ride, to put it mildly, while the Greeks were busy anthropomorphizing their gods into soap opera characters with a penchant for drama. The Thracians were crafting tales that wove together the harsh realities of their environment with the kind of mysticism that could make a modern-day fantasy novel look like a grocery list. At the heart of this spiritual tapestry was the enigmatic figure of Orpheus, a legendary musician and prophet whose mythos resonated far beyond the Thracian borders. Orpheus was the original rock star, and his story is as compelling as it is tragic. The Thracians believed he could charm even the fiercest beasts with his music, a talent that made him a revered figure not only in Thrace, but also in Greek mythology. His descent into the underworld to retrieve his beloved Eurydice was a tale of love, loss, and the power of art, a story so potent that it echoed through the annals of ancient literature and remains a cultural touchstone to this day. Talk about a crossover hit. But here's where the plot thickens. Orpheus wasn't just a mythical musician. He was also associated with a religious movement that bore his name, Orphism. This was no ordinary faith. It was a mystery religion, with initiations and secret rites that promised followers a deeper understanding of the cosmos, and crucially, a better afterlife. In a world where the hereafter was often as uncertain as a roll of the dice, this was a powerful selling point. The core tenet of Orphism was the idea of the soul's immortality and its cyclical journey through rebirth, a concept that would later find echoes in Greek philosophical thought, influencing thinkers like Pythagoras and Plato. The Orphic text, which included hymns and sacred writings, offered a glimpse into this esoteric belief system, combining elements of Thracian shamanism with Greek religious practices. It was the spiritual equivalent of a fusion restaurant, part familiar, part exotic, and wholly intriguing. But not all Thracian religious practices were as palatable to their neighbors. The Thracians were also known for rituals that were, shall we say, a bit more visceral. Take, for instance, their penchant for human sacrifice, a practice that, while not unique to Thrace, certainly added a layer of intensity to their spiritual endeavors. The Greeks, ever the drama critics, were both horrified and fascinated by these rites, which they saw as barbaric, and yet strangely alluring in their primal authenticity. One of the more infamous rituals was the worship of Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy, who bore more than a passing resemblance to the Thracian deity Sabazios. This was a god who knew how to party, and his rites often involved frenzied dancing, intoxicating substances, and yes, the occasional bloodletting. It was an event that made your average toga party look like a book club meeting, and it left an indelible mark on the Dionysian mysteries that later captivated Greek society. Of course, the real kicker is how these Thracian practices filtered into the Roman world. The Romans, ever the cultural magpies, adopted Dionysian elements into their Bacchanalia, a festival so notorious for its excess that the Roman Senate attempted to regulate it in 186 BCE. Imagine a governmental decree trying to curb the wildest frat party of the ancient world, and you've got a sense of the chaos these rites could unleash. But beyond the revelry and the rituals, there was a profound respect for nature in the Thracian spiritual landscape. Their deities often embodied the forces of the natural world, reflecting the rugged terrain that shaped their daily lives. This connection to nature was something the Greeks and Romans found both exotic and alluring, and it seeped into their own pantheons in subtle ways. Now, let's debunk a few myths while we're at it. While the Thracians were often depicted as bloodthirsty barbarians, their religious practices were deeply symbolic, reflecting a complex understanding of life, death, and rebirth. The idea that they were simply savages with a taste for sacrifice is a narrative spun by their more civilized neighbors, who often used such tales to justify their own imperial ambitions. In truth, the Thracians had a rich spiritual life that was as vital to their identity as their military prowess or economic savvy. They were a people who saw the divine in the everyday, who found meaning in the cycles of nature and the rhythms of the earth. Their mythology and religious practices were as much about survival as they were about spirituality, providing a framework for understanding a world that was often as unpredictable as it was beautiful. While we're on the subject of unpredictability, it's worth noting that the Thracians' influence didn't end with the fall of their tribes. Their myths and religious ideas lived on, weaving their way into the cultural narratives of the Greeks and Romans, and eventually into the broader tapestry of Western thought. The Orphic hymns, in particular, have been rediscovered and reinterpreted throughout history, offering a timeless message about the power of art and the eternal nature of the soul. So, as we sip our metaphorical wine and ponder the mysteries of the Thracian world, let's remember that their legacy is far more complex than the barbarian stereotypes would suggest. They were a people of contradictions, warriors and mystics, traders and poets, lovers of life and contemplators of death. Their story is a reminder that history's footnotes often hold the most intriguing tales, and that the past is never as simple as it seems. As we wrap up this mystical detour, remember that the Thracians have more secrets to share. We've only scratched the surface of their cultural impact, and there are still plenty of surprises waiting in the wings. So, keep your curiosity peaked and your skepticism sharp, because this ancient saga is far from over. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll delve further into the Thracian influence on the ancient world and uncover more stories that challenge our understanding of history's forgotten players. Thracians, a people whose story is as tangled as a grapevine and just as fruitful. But like all good things, their time in the spotlight eventually dimmed. Caught between the ambitions of burgeoning empires and the relentless march of history, the Thracians faced a decline that was as inevitable as it was tragic. Let's not sugarcoat it. Their downfall was a study in geopolitical realities, where the ancient world played a game of thrones long before HBO made it cool. By the time the Romans rolled in with their legions and their insatiable appetite for expansion, the Thracians had already been softened by centuries of internal conflict and external pressures. You see, Thrace was more than just a land of myth and mystery. It was a strategic prize that everyone wanted a piece of. Positioned as a gateway between Europe and Asia, it was the kind of real estate that would make a modern developer drool. The Thracians, with their decentralized tribal structure, were ill-equipped to withstand the organized might of Rome. Think of it like a scrappy startup trying to fend off a corporate takeover by a multinational giant. Spoiler alert, the giant usually wins. The Romans, never ones to pass up an opportunity for more territory, annexed Thrace in AD 46. This was less a dramatic conquest and more a formalization of control that had been creeping in for decades. Romans were nothing if not pragmatic, and they knew that to control Thrace was to control the rich veins of gold and silver that ran through its mountains. This wasn't just about glory. It was about the cold, hard economics of empire building. Julius Caesar himself once remarked on the wealth of Thrace, noting that its resources were a boon to the Roman coffers. And let's face it, nothing greases the wheels of imperial ambition quite like a healthy influx of precious metals. But as the Romans consolidated their hold, the distinct cultural identity of the Thracians began to fade. It wasn't an overnight erasure. Rather, it was a slow blending into the Roman tapestry, a cultural assimilation that was as much about survival as it was about inevitability. The Thracians, ever the pragmatists, adapted to the new order. They became Roman citizens, soldiers, and farmers, contributing to the empire's vast machinery while gradually losing the distinctiveness that had once set them apart. Yet despite this assimilation, the Thracians left behind a legacy that would surprise even the most ardent history buffs. Their influence rippled through the cultural currents of Rome, leaving traces in art, religion, and even military tactics. The falx, that wickedly curved blade that had once cleaved through enemy ranks, found a new home in the Roman military, where it was adapted and adopted for its brutal efficiency. And let's not forget the Orphic mysteries that continued to captivate the Roman imagination, weaving their way into the spiritual fabric of the empire. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Thracians is their contribution to the cultural melting pot that was the Roman Empire. They were a testament to the idea that even as a distinct people fade from history, their impact can resonate through the ages. The Thracians may have been subsumed by Rome, but their spirit lived on in the stories, songs, and traditions that continue to echo through the ancient world. As we reflect on the Thracians' place in history, it's clear that they were more than just a footnote. They were a reminder that even the most formidable warriors and cunning traders can be swept away by the tides of change. Yet in their adaptability and resilience, they left a mark that endures, challenging us to reconsider what it means to be remembered in the annals of time. So, as you pour yourself a glass of wine, perhaps from a bottle that owes its lineage to those ancient Thracian vineyards, take a moment to toast these enigmatic people. They were the unsung heroes of their time, living on the fringes of empire, yet shaping the world in ways that continue to surprise us. The Thracians may have vanished from the map, but their story remains a potent reminder of the complexities and contradictions that define history. And who knows? In the grand tapestry of time, perhaps we are all a little bit Thracian, navigating the shifting tides of our own empires, both real and imagined. You're standing on a rocky hill, and the sea breeze carries the scent of olives and adventure. It's the late 13th century BCE, and Greece isn't exactly the unified land of statues and philosophers you might imagine. Nope, it's a patchwork quilt of city-states, each with its own quirks and squabbles. In fact, the notion of a single Greek identity is about as real as Zeus himself throwing lightning bolts from Mount Olympus. Instead, you've got Mycenaeans with their palatial complexes, and then there are the farmers, scratching out a living with no palaces in sight. Let's talk Mycenaeans first. These guys are the rock stars of the Aegean, strutting about with their Linear B riding system and their big, blingy palaces. Mycenae itself is a powerhouse, with walls so thick they'd make a modern-day contractor weep with envy. The famous Lion Gate of Mycenae. It's as much a statement piece as a Kardashian's Instagram post. This is a society that thrives on trade, with ships zigzagging the Mediterranean, swapping wine, olive oil, and pottery like ancient Amazon Prime deliveries. But all this opulence comes at a price. Maintaining this lavish lifestyle requires resources, lots of them. And that's where the average farmer comes in. Now, if you're one of those farmers, life isn't quite as Instagrammable. Your days consist of toiling in the fields, trying to coax crops from the stubborn Greek soil. Forget about a cushy 9 to 5. This is dawn-to-dusk labor. You're working with tools that haven't changed much in centuries, and if the harvest fails, you're out of luck, my friend. Meanwhile, those Mycenaean elites are throwing banquets in their megarons, think grand halls, with goblets overflowing, while you're counting olives like it's a bad game of marbles. Socially, it's all about alliances and power plays. The Mycenaeans aren't just sitting pretty in their palaces. They're forming alliances and rivalries with other city-states, from Sparta to Athens to Corinth, each with its own agenda and ambitions. It's a bit like a never-ending season of Survivor, but with more sandals and fewer torches. These alliances are crucial, especially with the looming threat of the Trojan War on the horizon. Remember, Troy isn't just a myth cooked up by Homer. It's an actual city, and controlling it means dominating the trade routes connecting Europe and Asia. Speaking of trade routes, they're the arteries of the ancient economy. Ships ply the waters, carrying everything from copper and tin, the stuff of bronze, to exotic spices and textiles. And let's not forget the all-important grain shipments. A good harvest in Egypt could mean the difference between feast and famine in Greece. So, while the Mycenaeans are busy playing politics, the farmers are praying for good weather and a bit of luck. But let's debunk a myth, the idea of Greeks as a single, united people. In reality, it's more like a loose confederation of rival siblings, each city-state fiercely independent and often at odds with its neighbors. Sure, they share a language and some cultural beliefs, but unity, that's as elusive as Achilles' heel. This fragmented landscape is what makes the whole Trojan War saga so compelling. It's not just a story of Greeks versus Trojans. It's a tale of ambition, jealousy, and the pursuit of glory. And yes, Helen's face might have launched 1,000 ships, but it was politics and economics that kept them sailing. The political landscape is as tangled as a ball of yarn in a cat's paws. Kings like Agamemnon of Mycenae wield considerable power, but it's not absolute. His authority is constantly challenged by other leaders, each trying to carve out their own piece of the pie. The balance of power is delicate, with alliances shifting like the sands of time. This isn't a world of static empires. It's dynamic, ever-changing, and occasionally explosive. As we inch closer to the Trojan War, remember that this isn't just a clash of arms, but a collision of economies and ideologies. The Mycenaean palaces may be gleaming on the outside, but beneath the surface, there are cracks. The pressure to maintain power and prestige is immense, and the burden falls on the shoulders of those who can least afford it, the common people. It's a world of contrasts, where opulence and poverty exist side by side, each fueling the other in an endless cycle. So, as you stand on that rocky hill, take a moment to appreciate the complexity of ancient Greece. It's a tapestry woven with ambition, trade, and a dash of myth, enough to make you wonder if history really does repeat itself. Now, let's dive headfirst into the nitty-gritty of Greek warfare logistics, where the romance of noble warriors clashes with the grim realities of ancient military life. First up, the fleet. It's not as simple as pointing at the sea and shouting, "To Troy!" Nope. Maintaining a fleet is about as cheap as a weekend on Mykonos during peak season. Imagine this. The Greeks had to muster around 1,000 ships, each requiring wood, sails, and a crew. That's a staggering number, more than your average city-state could dream of assembling without making serious enemies and burning through resources faster than a pyromaniac at a bonfire. And let's talk strategy. Bronze, the superstar alloy of the ancient world, was as crucial to warfare as Wi-Fi is to modern life. This metal's importance can't be overstated. It's the difference between wielding a sturdy sword and a glorified butter knife. The Greeks needed tin and copper to produce bronze, and neither metal was a local commodity. They had to import it, which meant controlling trade routes was as vital as winning battles. Those Mycenaean palaces, built with bronze tools, those shiny warrior helmets, bronze. Heck, even the chariots had bronze fittings. Without it, the Greek war machine grinds to a halt faster than you can say Achilles' heel. But before you start picturing buff heroes straight out of a Hollywood epic, let's debunk that myth. The life of a Greek warrior was less glorious adventure and more grueling ordeal. Sure, they might have had their moments of heroism, but day to day, it was a slog. Picture this. You're cramped on a ship with dozens of your closest comrades, and by closest, I mean there's zero personal space. Hygiene. Let's just say it was about as pleasant as a public restroom at a music festival, and food shortages, commonplace. When you're depending on sporadic supply runs, and whatever local resources you can pillage, feasting on hearty dinners quickly turns into rationing stale bread and dried fish. It's no wonder these warriors were always keen on plundering. Sometimes it was that or starve. Now, when the Greeks weren't fighting Trojans or their own hunger, they were battling the elements. The Aegean Sea is beautiful, sure, but it's also as unpredictable as a reality TV plotline. Storms could scatter fleets and sink ships, and let's not even get started on the navigation. This wasn't a world of GPS and sonar. Sailors relied on the stars and sheer luck. You'd be praying to Poseidon every time you set sail, hoping he was in a good mood. Economically speaking, the cost of war was astronomical. Funding a prolonged campaign like the Trojan War was more than just a financial drain. It was a potential political disaster. City-states had to levy heavy taxes, and the burden fell squarely on the shoulders of, you guessed it, the common folk. Farmers already struggling to make ends meet found themselves squeezed tighter than a pair of ill-fitting sandals. This wasn't just a war fought on foreign soil. It was one that left its mark on every village and field back home. And let's not forget the human cost. Casualties were high, and the wounded warriors who returned home often found themselves unable to return to their previous livelihoods. With limited medical knowledge, a serious injury could mean a lifetime of pain and hardship. The heroic tales of warriors clashing on the battlefield often gloss over the aftermath, the trauma, the loss, and the societal impact. So, when you picture those legendary battles, remember they were fought by men who were often hungry, tired, and desperately hoping to survive another day. They weren't just wielding weapons. They were carrying the weight of their city-states' ambitions on their shoulders. The romanticized image of noble warriors might make for great stories, but the reality was far more complex and, frankly, gritty. As we continue this exploration of ancient Greek life during the Trojan War, keep in mind that beneath the glittering allure of myth lies a tapestry of hardship, resilience, and human ingenuity. It's a story where the stakes were as high as the walls of Troy, and the cost of glory was paid in blood, sweat, and bronze. So let's sail onward, through the choppy waters of history, where the next chapter awaits with tales of cunning, deception, and the enduring struggle for power. So, we've set sail through the rough seas of history, and here we are, docked at one of the most enduring and charmingly dubious tales from the ancient world, the Trojan horse. Cue the ominous music and dramatic lighting, because this story is about as believable as a politician's promise, yet it's captivated imaginations for millennia. Let's dive into why this wooden behemoth is more than just a crafty piece of carpentry. First things first, did the Trojan horse actually exist? Historically speaking, the evidence is about as solid as a sandcastle during high tide. The earliest accounts of the Trojan War, like those from our buddy Homer, are poetic epics, not eyewitness reports. Homer's Iliad doesn't even mention the horse. It's the Odyssey and later works like Virgil's Aeneid that give us the equine sneak attack. So why did this narrative gain such traction? It's all about the allure of cleverness triumphing over brute force. The Greeks loved a good brain-over-brawn story, and this one fits the bill perfectly. The idea of warriors hidden inside a giant horse, rolled into enemy territory under the guise of a peace offering, is the ultimate tale of cunning. It's the ancient version of a Trojan email scam, except instead of malware, you get Greek soldiers. Now, let's talk plausibility. Constructing a massive wooden horse and convincing the Trojans to bring it inside their impenetrable walls seems far-fetched. Picture this. A wooden structure large enough to hold dozens of soldiers would require significant resources and expertise. We're talking about a monumental carpentry project in the middle of a war zone. The Greeks would have needed materials, manpower, and time, none of which were in abundance. Building something that size would have been as conspicuous as planting a neon sign saying, "Surprise attack here." Yet, the story endures because it taps into something universal, the appeal of an underdog victory, a David and Goliath moment where wit outsmarts might. Beyond the sheer logistics, the Trojan horse symbolizes the Greek appreciation for strategy and deception in warfare. In a world where direct conflict often led to high casualties, trickery was not just acceptable, but admired. The Greeks were masters of psychological warfare, understanding that the mind could be as potent a weapon as the sword. This is evident in their military practices, from using deceptive formations to the strategic use of oracles and omens to unsettle their foes. The horse story reflects this ethos, showcasing the value placed on ingenuity and surprise. But why, you ask, would the Trojans fall for such an obvious ruse? Surely, skepticism existed in ancient Troy, right? Enter the cultural significance of storytelling. The Trojans, like the Greeks, were steeped in a tradition of oral history and myth-making. Stories were more than entertainment. They were a means of preserving cultural identity and imparting values. The horse tale fits into this narrative tapestry, illustrating the dangers of hubris and the catastrophic consequences of ignoring warnings. The Trojans' acceptance of the horse can be seen as a nod to the fallibility of human nature and the perils of pride, a timeless lesson wrapped in a legendary package. Moreover, storytelling played a crucial role in maintaining morale and unity among the Greeks during the long siege. The war wasn't just a series of skirmishes. It was a drawn-out conflict lasting around 10 years. That's a decade of battles, boredom, and bad food. As anyone who's ever waited for a delayed flight knows, patience wears thin. In such a context, the power of a good story to inspire and motivate becomes invaluable. The narrative of the Trojan horse, whether true or not, served to reinforce the idea that victory was possible, keeping spirits high and soldiers focused. Economically, the siege of Troy was a colossal investment. The resources required to sustain a military campaign of this scale were staggering. We're talking about feeding and equipping thousands of soldiers, maintaining a fleet, and ensuring a steady supply line of essential materials like bronze, food, and textiles. This wasn't just a military operation. It was an economic endeavor that tested the resilience of the Greek city-states. The Trojan horse, in this context, represents not only a strategic gamble, but a financial one. If successful, it promised a swift end to the conflict and access to Troy's wealth, a prize worth the risk. Politically, the tale of the Trojan horse underscores the delicate balance of power among the Greek leaders. Figures like Odysseus, credited with the idea of the horse, were celebrated not just for their bravery, but for their cunning, a trait highly valued in the cutthroat world of ancient Greek politics. The story highlights the importance of individual agency within the collective effort of war. In a society where heroism was often measured by physical prowess, the success of the Trojan horse elevated the status of strategic thinkers, setting a precedent for future leaders. So, while the physical existence of a giant wooden horse remains debatable, its symbolic significance is undeniable. The tale encapsulates key aspects of Greek warfare, culture, and values, illustrating the potent blend of myth and reality that defines much of ancient history. It's a story that resonates because it speaks to universal themes: ingenuity, the folly of pride, and the power of narrative to shape events and perceptions. As we continue our journey through this ancient world, remember that beneath the surface of grand myths lie the gritty realities of human endeavor. The next leg of our expedition promises more intrigue and insights as we unravel the layers of history that have shaped the legacy of the Trojan War. So, hold onto your helmets, because this saga is far from over, and the pages of history are waiting to reveal their secrets. With the wooden horse's legacy looming large, let's pivot from the battlefield to the battleground of daily life in post-war Greece. The Trojan War's aftermath wasn't just a footnote in history. It was a seismic event that sent shockwaves through every stratum of Greek society. So, you're back home from Troy, and it's not exactly a hero's welcome. Imagine returning after a decade-long war, only to find that the world you left behind has shifted like sand in a Greek hourglass. First up, the economic toll. This war wasn't just a military endeavor. It was a financial black hole. Funding a conflict that lasted around 10 years is like trying to fill a leaky amphora with wine. Inefficient and ultimately unsustainable. City-states had to dig deep, and by dig deep, I mean they squeezed every last drop from their resources. Taxes skyrocketed, and the burden landed on the shoulders of, you guessed it, the common folk. Farmers, artisans, and merchants found themselves footing the bill for a war that, quite frankly, left them high and dry. Economic strain was palpable, as city-states struggled to recover depleted coffers and rebuild trade networks disrupted by years of conflict. Politically, the war's end didn't mean peace and harmony. Nope, it was more like a game of political musical chairs, and when the music stopped, the seats were often occupied by new players. The vacuum left by fallen leaders and the shifting allegiances of those who survived led to upheaval. Take Agamemnon, for example. He returned home to Mycenae only to meet a rather sticky end, courtesy of a family feud that makes your average soap opera look like child's play. Others, like Odysseus, faced their own trials and tribulations, which were later immortalized in tales that blurred the lines between history and myth. Now, let's talk about those returning veterans. After a decade of fighting, these guys weren't exactly the picture of health and vigor. Many were wounded, both physically and mentally, and reintegrating into civilian life was no walk in the agora. Ancient Greece didn't exactly have a robust VA system, and veterans often found themselves struggling to reclaim their pre-war lives. The trauma of battle left scars that were felt in every corner of society, influencing everything from family dynamics to social hierarchies. Culturally, the Trojan War left an indelible mark. The experiences of returning soldiers and the stories they brought back helped fuel a rich tapestry of art and literature. This was the soil in which the seeds of the Homeric epics were planted. Works like the Iliad and the Odyssey aren't just poems. They're cultural touchstones that shaped Greek identity for centuries. These epics wove tales of heroism and folly, blending fact and fiction in a way that resonated with audiences then and now. They offered a narrative framework that helped people make sense of the chaos and upheaval left in the wake of war. The war also sparked a shift in artistic expression. We see this in the pottery, frescoes, and sculptures that followed. Depictions of warriors and battle scenes became more common, reflecting a society grappling with the realities of conflict. Art became a medium for processing the collective trauma, a way to honor the fallen and immortalize the struggles of those who survived. Themes of honor, sacrifice, and the capriciousness of fate permeated the cultural landscape, offering both catharsis and cautionary tales. But let's not romanticize it too much. For the average Greek, the post-war world was a harsh one. The economic disparity between the elites and the common folk widened, as those with means could weather the storm, while others sank beneath its waves. The societal fabric was frayed, and rebuilding it required time, effort, and an awful lot of olive oil. Recovery was slow, and the scars left by the war lingered like a bad hangover. Yet in this period of reconstruction, we witnessed the resilience of human spirit. Communities banded together, adapting to new realities and finding innovative ways to thrive. Trade routes were re-established, alliances formed, and city-states began to rebuild, brick by brick, drachma by drachma. The war had reshaped the landscape, but it also laid the groundwork for future growth and development. In essence, the aftermath of the Trojan War was a crucible of change, a time when the old ways were challenged and new paradigms emerged. It's a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a complex web of human experiences that continue to echo through the ages. As we sail onward to the next chapter, the stories of these ancient Greeks remind us that while the past may be distant, its lessons are as relevant as ever. So, hang tight, because our journey through the aftermath of the Trojan War is far from over. Ahead lies more intrigue, more drama, and more insights into a world that, despite the centuries, feels remarkably familiar. Keep your eyes on the horizon, because the story of ancient Greece is still unfolding, and there's plenty more to uncover. As we unfurl the sails on this final leg of our odyssey through the Trojan War's legacy, let's dive headfirst into the mythic whirlpool that is its enduring cultural impact. It's a tale that has been spun, respun, and spun again, like a never-ending game of historical telephone. The Trojan War isn't just an event from the dusty annals of history. It's a living legend that continues to enthrall, educate, and occasionally mislead us. First off, let's talk Homer. The guy's as famous as any ancient poet can get, and his epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, have been the backbone of Western literature for millennia. But here's the kicker. Homer didn't exactly pen these tales in real-time reportage. He was more of an ancient bard remixing and mythologizing stories that had been passed down orally. His works are less History Channel and more once upon a time in the Aegean. These epics offer a heady cocktail of fact, fiction, and everything in between. They're the literary equivalent of a blockbuster movie, inspired by true events, where the explosions are bigger, the heroes are bolder, and the truths are, well, more flexible. The appeal of these stories is undeniable. They tap into universal themes of love, honor, betrayal, and vengeance. Who doesn't love a good drama with a dash of divine intervention? The idea of gods meddling in human affairs offers a convenient scapegoat for all the chaos. Blame it on Zeus, because why not? After all, there's something comforting about attributing the unpredictability of life to the whims of capricious deities rather than the randomness of fate. Yet, as captivating as these narratives are, they often gloss over the gritty realities faced by those who lived through the Trojan War and its aftermath. While Achilles and Hector were busy earning their legendary status, the average Greek was dealing with the nitty-gritty of survival. The war's true cost, measured not in heroic deeds, but in economic strain, societal upheaval, and personal loss, is often relegated to the background. It's a classic case of history being written, or sung, by the victors, with the everyday struggles of the common folk left unsung. But why does this mythic tapestry continue to fascinate us? In part, it's because these stories offer a lens through which we can examine our own values and beliefs. They provide archetypes of heroism and villainy that resonate across the ages. The concept of the hero's journey, so eloquently embodied by Odysseus, has become a narrative staple, influencing everything from ancient tragedy to modern cinema. It's a tale as old as time. A flawed hero faces insurmountable odds, endures trials, and ultimately finds redemption or downfall. This narrative arc satisfies our craving for structure in the chaos of life, offering a sense of order and meaning. Moreover, the Trojan War serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition and the fragility of human endeavors. The war itself was sparked by a mix of personal vendetta and geopolitical strategy, a potent reminder that the line between myth and reality is as thin as Paris's loyalty. The conflict highlights the destructive potential of pride and the catastrophic consequences of ignoring diplomacy. It's a narrative that echoes through history, from the fall of empires to the boardrooms of modern corporations. Hubris, it seems, is a timeless affliction. In the realm of education, the Trojan War has become a keystone of classical studies. It's the starting point for discussions about ancient Greek culture, providing insights into their social hierarchies, economic dependencies, and political machinations. The war's narratives are dissected for their literary merit, historical context, and philosophical implications. They serve as a bridge to understanding the complexities of the ancient world, and by extension, our own. Yet, as we dissect these stories, it's crucial to maintain a healthy dose of skepticism. The romanticized versions of history often obscure the harsher realities faced by those who lived it. The tales of noble warriors and divine machinations can easily overshadow the contributions of the unsung heroes, the farmers, artisans, and merchants who kept the wheels of society turning despite the chaos of war. Recognizing their role in history reminds us that progress often comes on the backs of the many, not just the deeds of the few. The legacy of the Trojan War also speaks to the power of storytelling as a tool for shaping cultural identity. These myths have been retold, reimagined, and repurposed across generations, each iteration reflecting contemporary values and concerns. In the Renaissance, they were revived to explore themes of humanism and individualism. In modern times, they've been adapted into films, novels, and even video games, proving that these ancient tales still hold sway over our imaginations. Ultimately, the Trojan War's enduring appeal lies in its ability to transcend time and space, offering both a mirror and a window. It mirrors our own struggles with ambition, conflict, and the search for meaning, while providing a window into a world that, despite its differences, feels remarkably familiar. This duality is what keeps the story alive, inviting us to explore its depths and draw parallels to our own lives. As we anchor this journey through the annals of history, let's remember that the past is not a static relic, but a dynamic force that continues to shape our present. The myths and realities of the Trojan War remind us that history is a tapestry woven from countless threads, some glittering, others frayed, but all integral to the whole. Let's carry these lessons forward, using them to illuminate the path as we navigate the complexities of our own era. After all, while the players and settings may change, the essence of the human story remains as captivating as ever. The sun baked the sands of ancient Egypt, but it was Ramses Roman II who truly turned up the heat in the dynastic drama department. Before he was the great, Ramses was just a kid with a whole lot of destiny plastered on his bedroom walls. He was born around 1303 BCE, a time when hieroglyphs were the tweets of the age, and his father, Seti I, was busy building the family's reputation as rulers who knew how to wield power and a chisel equally well. Seti I, a man who could have taught Machiavelli a thing or two about political chess, was the pharaoh who laid the groundwork for his son's blockbuster career. You see, Seti wasn't just any ruler. He was the pharaoh who turned Egypt's military into a well-oiled machine, or, well, as well-oiled as Bronze Age warfare guard. Under his reign, Egypt's borders stretched like a sun-tanned arm along the Mediterranean, and he set out to ensure his son was ready to inherit not just a throne, but a legacy. Ramses, growing up in this environment, didn't just have a silver spoon in his mouth. He had a golden scepter in his grip. From an early age, he was groomed for greatness, which in ancient Egypt translated to a lot of learning about guards, governance, and the subtle art of smiting one's enemies. But let's not oversell the glamour. Behind the grandeur of his education was a world of political intrigue and family dynamics that could rival any soap opera. As a young prince, Ramses was likely taught how to navigate the complex waters of Egyptian court politics, where alliances were as changeable as the Nile's flood levels. The royal family wasn't just about lavish banquets and divine decrees. It was a hotbed of competition and power plays. With multiple siblings and half-siblings, Ramses had to stand out, not just in personality, but in prowess. Family dinners probably included less small talk and more strategic alliances and subtle jabs about who was Seti's favorite. Seti I, ever the strategist, didn't leave his son's ascent to chance. He appointed young Ramses as co-regent at the tender age of 14. This wasn't just a father-son bonding exercise. It was a master class in ruling. By making Ramses co-regent, Seti ensured the young prince got hands-on experience in governance. It was like an internship, but instead of coffee runs, Ramses was learning how to run a country. And let's not forget the PR aspect. Seti knew the power of image, and he was already branding his son as the next big thing in Pharaohs. The ancient equivalent of social media campaigns and royal tours was in full swing, with Ramses positioned as the prodigy who would carry Egypt to new heights, or at least not run it into the ground. Now, Ramses was no slouch when it came to living up to the hype, but like any young ruler in training, he had his share of slip-ups. Early in his reign, he had to deal with a few hiccups that would have made even the most seasoned pharaohs wince. Case in point, his first military outing against the Hittites. It was supposed to be his moment, his chance to shine on the battlefield, but it turned into a bit of a debacle. Ramses went in with the gusto of a young lion, but quickly found himself in a precarious position at the Battle of Kadesh. Despite the chaos, Ramses spun the narrative like a pro. He claimed a glorious victory, commissioning no less than 4 temples to carve his version of events into stone. Who needs reality when you've got a chisel and a good story to tell? This knack for self-promotion became a hallmark of Ramses's reign. From day one, he had an eye for PR that would put modern spin doctors to shame. His penchant for monument building wasn't just about ego, though there was plenty of that. It was a strategic move to cement his legacy. Ramses Roman II knew that in a world where literacy was a luxury, big, bold carvings of his likeness would do the talking for him. By the time he was done, his face was everywhere, from the grand temples of Abu Simbel to the columns of Luxor. But Ramses didn't just build to show off. Each monument was a message, a proclamation of his divine right to rule, and a reminder of his supposed invincibility. Sure, it was a bit over the top, but in a land where gods walked among mortals, it was all part of the show. And while his contemporaries may have raised an eyebrow, Ramses didn't mind. After all, why settle for being remembered as just another pharaoh when you could be the pharaoh? In the grand tapestry of history, Ramses Roman II stands out not just for his military campaigns or his architectural feats, but for his sheer audacity. He was a man who understood that power wasn't just about armies and alliances. It was about perception and legacy. He crafted his image with the meticulousness of a master sculptor, ensuring that his name would echo through the corridors of time. So, as Ramses stepped into the sandals of power, he did so with the weight of expectation on his shoulders, and a kingdom watching his every move. He was determined not just to fill his father's shoes, but to leave footprints of his own across the sands of time. And with a little bit of hubris and a whole lot of ambition, Ramses Roman II embarked on a reign that would forever etch his name into the annals of history. And so, Ramses Roman II, with all the bravado of a rock star on a world tour, embarked on his reign determined to leave more than just a few footprints in the sands of time. First on the agenda, a little something called the Battle of Kadesh. You see, Ramses was itching to flex his military muscles, and the Hittites were proving to be a thorn in his side. The Hittite Empire, led by Muwatalli Roman II, wasn't just any opponent. They were the heavyweight champions of the region, controlling territories that Ramses had his eye on like a kid staring at the last piece of cake. Now, let's set the stage for this epic showdown. It's 1274 BCE, and Ramses is leading an army of about 20,000 troops, divided into 4 divisions named after Egyptian gods: Amun, Ra, Ta, and Set. It's like naming your sports teams after superheroes. Hard to resist the allure of divine branding. His target was the city of Kadesh, strategically perched on the Orontes River in what is now Syria. Kadesh was the key to controlling the trade routes and resources of the region, making it the crown jewel in the geopolitical chess game of the time. But Ramses, in his haste to engage the enemy, made a classic military blunder. He believed some dodgy intelligence. 2 captured Hittite spies, channeling their inner tricksters, fed him a line that Muwatalli and his forces were miles away. Ramses, buying this tale hook, line, and sinker, marched his Amun division ahead, leaving his other divisions trailing like an afterthought. As it turns out, Muwatalli was not miles away. He was right there, lurking with an army estimated at 40,000 strong, ready to pounce like a cat on a careless mouse. Ensuing chaos at Kadesh was not Ramses' finest military hour. His forces were scattered, and he found himself in a tight spot, surrounded by Hittite chariots. Yet in the midst of this melee, Ramses claimed to have rallied his troops with the fervor of a motivational speaker at a corporate retreat. He charged into the fray, supposedly turning the tide single-handedly. At least, that's what the official Egyptian records, crafted under Ramses' ever-watchful eye, would have you believe. The reality, however, was a bit more nuanced. The battle ended in a stalemate, with neither side achieving a decisive victory. But Ramses, ever the spin doctor, wasn't about to let facts get in the way of a good story. Back in Egypt, he commissioned an array of impressive monuments to immortalize his supposed triumph. Think of it as ancient propaganda, with Ramses as the hero who saved the day, his victories finally etched in temple walls for all eternity. He even went so far as to plaster his narrative all over 4 temples, including the mortuary temple at Thebes. Because why settle for one monument when you can have a quartet? This wasn't just about boasting rights. It was strategic myth-making. By controlling the narrative, Ramses solidified his image as a warrior king, a leader who could fend off Egypt's foes with divine backing. And let's face it, in a world where news traveled at the speed of a camel caravan, his version was the one most Egyptians heard. The Battle of Kadesh became the ancient equivalent of a blockbuster movie, complete with a larger-than-life hero and plenty of creative liberties. But behind the grandiose tales and the stone carvings of Ramses valiantly smiting his enemies lay the gritty realities of ancient warfare. Sustaining a campaign of this magnitude required a logistical feat that would make modern supply chain managers break into a cold sweat. Feeding an army of 20,000 meant moving tons of grain, meat, and water across the desert, a logistical nightmare that involved countless pack animals and a small army of support staff. The costs were staggering, not just in terms of resources, but in human lives. Casualties were high, and the toll on the economy was a price Ramses was willing to pay for the sake of his legacy. And what of the economic implications? Well, Egypt's treasury took a hit. All those fancy chariots and shiny weapons didn't come cheap. Ramses had to ensure that his campaigns didn't drain the royal coffers dry, so he balanced his military ambitions with a shrewd economic policy back home. He focused on bolstering trade, particularly with Nubia, rich in gold and other resources that kept Egypt's economy afloat. Ramses also embarked on a building spree, employing thousands in construction projects that served as both public works and propaganda tools. It's like creating jobs and boosting your approval rating all in one fell swoop. Yet, for all his grand designs, Ramses' military campaigns highlighted the delicate balance between ambition and reality. His prowess on the battlefield was as much about perception as it was about actual success. While he may not have conquered Kadesh in the way his inscriptions claimed, he did succeed in embedding his name into the annals of history as one of Egypt's most iconic pharaohs. And really, Isn't that what mattered most to Ramses? As Ramses returned from Kadesh, his legacy was already being carved in stone, literally and figuratively. His reign, marked by audacious military expeditions and monumental architecture, was a testament to his understanding of power and perception. He knew that history remembers those who tell the best stories, and Ramses was a master storyteller. The Battle of Kadesh might not have been the unequivocal victory he proclaimed, but it was a defining moment that showcased his flair for turning potential disaster into a narrative of triumph. So, while Ramses Roman II might not have had the clean victory he advertised, he certainly won the war of public opinion. His ability to shape history to his liking ensured that his name would echo through the ages, a testament to the power of spin long before the advent of modern media. As we continue to unravel the story of Ramses the Great, we'll see how his reign was a delicate dance of power, perception, and the occasional embellishment. And as any good storyteller knows, sometimes the legend is just as important as the reality. And speaking of turning potential disaster into a narrative of triumph, Ramses Roman II wasn't just about spinning tales of battlefield glory. Oh no, the man had architectural ambitions that would make even the most grandiose modern developers blush. Enter the temples of Abu Simbel, those colossal stone sentinels carved into the cliffs of southern Egypt, standing as a testament to Ramses' flair for the dramatic and his obsession with immortality. Now, let's talk numbers. The construction of Abu Simbel began around 1264 BCE and took about 2 decades to complete. Imagine being a laborer, working under the relentless sun for that long, all to etch the legacy of one man into stone. Ramses wasn't just building temples, he was crafting his own personal Mount Rushmore. These structures weren't just spiritual centers, they were the ancient world's equivalent of a massive billboard proclaiming, Ramses the Great was here. But let's not get swept away by the romance of chisels and hieroglyphs without considering the economic reality. Building Abu Simbel wasn't cheap. In fact, the sheer scale of this project placed a considerable strain on Egypt's resources. The temples were carved directly into the rock face, which required an enormous workforce and a whole lot of logistical finesse. The laborers, primarily conscripted peasants and skilled artisans, had to be fed, housed, and paid. Well, sort of. Payment often came in the form of rations and tax relief rather than cold, hard cash. This massive workforce wasn't just a drain on human resources. It was a logistical nightmare of epic proportions. Imagine coordinating thousands of workers, moving tons of stone, and ensuring that the whole endeavor stayed on schedule. The ancient Egyptians didn't have the luxury of cranes or bulldozers. They relied on manpower, wooden sledges, and a good understanding of physics to move those massive stone blocks into position. And let's not forget the Nile's role in this Herculean task. During the annual inundation, the river's floodwaters were used to transport materials closer to the site, a bit of natural engineering that saved countless hours of labor. But why, you might ask, would Ramses go to such lengths to build these colossal monuments? Was it pure vanity, or was there a method to his madness? The answer, as with most things in history, is a bit of both. Sure, Ramses wanted to be remembered as the greatest pharaoh of them all, but there was also a political and religious angle at play. The temples at Abu Simbel were strategically placed at Egypt's southern border, serving as both a warning to potential invaders and a celebration of Egypt's divine pantheon. The larger temple was dedicated to the gods Amun, Ra-Horakhti, and Ptah, with Ramses himself thrown into the mix as a god king. Talk about boosting your resume. And let's not forget the temple's twice-yearly solar alignment, a phenomenon that still dazzles visitors today. On 2 specific days of the year, February 22nd and October 22nd, the rising sun illuminates the statues of Ramses and the gods in the inner sanctuary. Coincidence? Hardly. This celestial event was no accident. It was a calculated move to reinforce Ramses' divine status, aligning his legacy with the very heavens. It's the kind of cosmic marketing stunt that even today's PR gurus would envy. However, the myth of Ramses as an all-knowing architect who single-handedly masterminded these feats needs a bit of debunking. While he undoubtedly had a vision, the real stars of the show were the skilled artisans and engineers who turned his dreams into reality. Archaeological evidence suggests that these craftsmen were incredibly sophisticated, employing techniques that were advanced for their time. They used ropes, levers, and a keen understanding of geometry to achieve precision in their work. The idea that Ramses was some sort of omnipotent mastermind pulling all the strings, well, that's just a bit of ancient spin. And let's address the elephant, or should I say, the limestone colossus, in the room, the economic impact of these projects. The construction of monumental architecture, while impressive, came at a cost. The resources diverted to Abu Simbel and other grandiose projects meant less for other areas of the economy. Sure, Ramses was creating jobs, but he was also stretching Egypt's coffers to their limits. The agricultural sector, the backbone of Egypt's economy, often shouldered the burden as farmers were conscripted into labor, leaving fields untended. But for Ramses, the economic strain was a small price to pay for a legacy that would last millennia. The temples of Abu Simbel weren't just buildings. They were symbols of his divine right to rule and his unmatched power. In a way, they were propaganda tools, ensuring that his image and achievements were immortalized in stone. And in a world where most people couldn't read, a 66-foot-tall statue was a pretty effective way to get your message across. So, as we stand in awe of the temples of Abu Simbel today, let's remember the human cost and economic calculations that made them possible. They are a testament to Ramses' ambition, yes, but also to the ingenuity and resilience of the workers who brought his vision to life. While Ramses' name might be the one etched into history, it was the collective effort of thousands that truly built his legacy. And yet, the allure of Ramses as a divine architect remains, a romantic notion that continues to captivate our imaginations. As we dig deeper into the life and times of Ramses Roman II, it becomes clear that his reign was a masterclass in balancing ambition with reality. He understood that power wasn't just about military might or architectural grandeur. It was about perception. By crafting a narrative of divine kingship and monumental achievement, Ramses ensured that his name would echo through the ages, a testament to the enduring power of myth and legacy. And so, with a wink and a nod to his old friend Perception, Ramses Roman II continued to build, rule, and shape history, leaving us with plenty more to explore. As Ramses Roman II continued to build, rule, and shape history with the same gusto as a pharaoh who knew his way around a chisel and a narrative, he didn't just rest on his laurels or his colossal statues. He had another card up his linen sleeve, diplomacy, because let's face it, even a king who could turn stone into self-promotion knew that you can't chisel your way out of every problem. Enter the Hittites, those pesky neighbors who had been the thorn in Ramses' side ever since the Battle of Kadesh, an event that had all the clarity of a soap opera plot, but left everyone scratching their heads about who really won. Now, the Hittites were no small fry. They controlled an empire that stretched across modern-day Turkey and into Syria, and they had a formidable military to boot. So after years of border skirmishes and the occasional full-blown battle, Ramses decided it was time to put down the sword and pick up the pen, or the papyrus, to be precise. The result, the first recorded peace treaty in history, signed around 1259 BCE. The Egyptians called it the Silver Treaty, perhaps because papyrus treaty didn't quite have the same ring to it. Picture it as the ancient equivalent of a political handshake, but with a lot more pomp and circumstance. But Ramses wasn't just playing nice for the sake of peace, love, and harmony. There was a hefty dose of realpolitik behind that treaty. You see, maintaining constant warfare with the Hittites wasn't just exhausting, it was economically draining. Armies don't feed themselves, and soldiers don't march on empty stomachs or empty coffers. By securing peace, Ramses could redirect resources to more constructive projects, like, you guessed it, more temples. Plus, with the Hittites off his back, Ramses could focus on expanding Egypt's influence elsewhere without constantly looking over his shoulder for a Hittite chariot. And what did the Hittites get out of this deal? Well, they were also dealing with their own set of problems, including threats from the Assyrians to the east. The treaty allowed them to secure their western front and focus on other pressing issues, like not getting overrun by a rising power. It was a win-win, albeit the kind where both sides pretended they got the better end of the bargain. The treaty itself was a masterpiece of legalese, full of mutual promises not to attack each other and pledges of military aid if one was attacked by a third party. Kind of like that friend who promises to back you up in a bar fight but hopes it never comes to that. And just to make sure everyone was on the same page, the treaty was inscribed in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Akkadian cuneiform, the international language of diplomacy at the time, because nothing says commitment like carving your promises into stone. Now, let's talk hidden agendas, because this wasn't just about singing Cumbear on the banks of the Nile. Ramses was acutely aware of the power of perception. By promoting himself as a peacemaker, he could bolster his image as not just a warrior king, but a wise and fair ruler. It was the ancient equivalent of a Nobel Peace Prize, minus the awkward acceptance speech. But behind Ramses' magnanimous facade was a shrewd understanding of the political landscape. The treaty served as a buffer against the growing power of the Assyrians, who were starting to flex their muscles in the region. By securing peace with the Hittites, Ramses was effectively building a firewall against Assyrian expansion. It was a strategic move that allowed Egypt to maintain its influence without overextending its military capabilities. And let's not forget the matrimonial angle. As part of the treaty, Ramses married a Hittite princess, adding a touch of familial diplomacy to the mix. Because nothing says, let's be friends, like a royal wedding. It was a classic power play, solidifying alliances through family ties, though one suspects the bride's feelings on the matter weren't high on anyone's agenda. But here's the kicker. While Ramses was busy crafting a narrative of peace and prosperity, the reality was far messier. The treaty didn't magically erase the tensions between the two empires. Border skirmishes continued, and both sides kept a wary eye on the other, ready to resume hostilities if the political winds changed. It was peace, but of the fragile. Let's not push our luck variety. Yet Ramses knew how to spin this precarious peace into a tale of triumph. In Egypt, the peace treaty was celebrated as a testament to Ramses' diplomatic prowess. Monumental inscriptions portrayed him as the pharaoh who brought stability to the region, never mind the simmering tensions beneath the surface. It was a masterclass in ancient PR, where perception often trumped reality. And so, Ramses' diplomatic maneuvers became another feather in his well-decorated cap, showcasing his ability to navigate the treacherous waters of international politics with the same finesse he applied to his architectural endeavors. While the treaty may not have ushered in an era of eternal peace, it was a calculated move that secured Egypt's borders and allowed Ramses to focus on consolidating his legacy. In a way, Ramses' peace with the Hittites was a reflection of the age-old adage, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. By turning a formidable foe into an uneasy ally, Ramses demonstrated that sometimes the best way to win a battle is to never fight it in the first place. It was a lesson in the art of compromise, wrapped in the grandeur of pharaonic diplomacy. As we continue to explore the life and times of Ramses Roman II, it's clear that his reign was as much about the stories he told as the battles he fought. His diplomatic triumphs, like his military campaigns, were carefully crafted narratives that served his greater purpose, to be remembered as Ramses the Great, the pharaoh who could conquer both war and peace. And in a world where history is often written by the victors, or at least those with the best sculptors, Ramses made sure his version of events would echo through the ages. The peace treaty with the Hittites stands as a testament to Ramses' understanding of the power of diplomacy, a skill as sharp as any sword. It was a calculated move that ensured his empire's stability and his own legacy. In the grand tapestry of history, Ramses Roman II wasn't just a warrior or a builder. He was a master of perception, a pharaoh who understood that sometimes the greatest victories are those won without a single drop of blood. As we delve deeper into his reign, we'll continue to unravel the stories that shaped his legend, exploring the myths and realities of a ruler who knew how to play the Game of Thrones long before it was a TV sensation. And so, as Ramses Roman II navigated the intricate dance of diplomacy, he was already crafting the next chapter of Egypt's saga, a story of legacy, longevity, and the kind of myth-making that might make even the most seasoned Hollywood producers nod in approval. His reign, clocking in at an impressive 66 years, from 1279 to 1213 BCE, wasn't just a footnote in the annals of history. It was a full-blown epic, complete with intrigue, ambition, and just a dash of divine right. Let's start with the sheer audacity of his architectural projects. By the time he was done, Ramses had left behind a legacy of monuments that would have made even the guards do a double take. The sheer scale of his building projects was staggering. Luxor Temple, the Ramesseum, and the aforementioned Abu symbol were just the headliners in a portfolio that spanned the length and breadth of Egypt. He wasn't just building for the present. He was constructing a narrative for the future, one where his image would loom large over the desert landscape like a stone-clad colossus. But let's not get carried away on a chariot of romanticism just yet. Ramses' building spree was less about artistic expression and more about a calculated strategy to cement his legacy. These weren't just temples. They were ancient billboards screaming, "Ramses the Great, Pharaoh extraordinaire," at anyone who dared to glance their way. And while the romantic image of a pharaoh single-handedly designing these marvels is appealing, the reality was a bit more grounded. Behind every monument was a legion of skilled artisans, architects, and laborers whose artistry and back-breaking toil turned Ramses' grand visions into stone-clad reality. Of course, the economic reality of such monumental ambition wasn't all sunshine and sandstone. These projects came with a hefty price tag. Ramses had to juggle the costs of construction with keeping Egypt's economy afloat, a balancing act that would have given modern CFOs a run for their money. The agricultural backbone of Egypt, the Nile's fertile valley, bore much of this burden. Fields were often left untended as farmers were drafted for labor, and the treasury strained under the weight of Ramses' grand designs. But for Ramses, the cost was justified. He wasn't just building temples, he was constructing a brand. And oh, what a brand it was. Ramses understood that in the grand game of history, image was everything. His inscriptions didn't just recount events. They curated a narrative where he was the central hero, blessed by the gods, victorious in battle, and wise in peace. These stories, carved into stone, served as the ancient world's version of viral marketing. Sure, there were embellishments. He might have taken more than a few liberties with the truth, but in a world where most people couldn't read or write, the monumental imagery of Ramses triumphing over chaos was as effective as it was awe-inspiring. Yet, for all his grandiose projects and self-aggrandizing stories, Ramses' reign wasn't just about perpetuating his glory. It was also about ensuring stability and continuity. His long rule provided Egypt with a rare period of relative peace and prosperity. The population flourished, trade routes expanded, and Egypt's influence extended far beyond its borders. Ramses understood that a stable home front was as crucial as any military victory, and he worked tirelessly to maintain order within his sprawling empire. And then there's the matter of Ramses' progeny. This pharaoh wasn't content with just leaving behind monuments. He left behind a veritable dynasty. With over 100 children. Yes, you heard that right. He was the ultimate family man. Ramses ensured that his bloodline would continue to rule long after his time. His successors were numerous, and while they may not have matched his flair for the dramatic, they continued to build on his legacy, ensuring that the House of Ramses remained a powerhouse in Egyptian politics for generations. But let's not forget the myths that have persisted through the centuries, painting Ramses as the quintessential larger-than-life ruler. The biblical Exodus narrative, for instance, has often been linked to Ramses, casting him as the pharaoh who faced off against Moses. While the historical accuracy of this connection is debated among scholars, the allure of such a dramatic tale is hard to resist. It's a classic case of myth blending with history, adding an extra layer of intrigue to Ramses' already colorful legacy. In the end, Ramses' Roman II legacy is a multifaceted tapestry, woven with threads of undeniable achievement and a touch of masterful PR spin. His reign was a lesson in the art of perception, a testament to the power of narrative in shaping history. Ramses understood that, while battles could be won or lost, stories had the power to endure. And so, he crafted a tale of divine kingship and monumental achievement that has echoed through the corridors of time, leaving us with a legacy that is as complex as it is fascinating. As we stand at the threshold of his era, looking back at the towering statues and the inscriptions that bear his name, it's clear that Ramses the Great wasn't just a ruler. He was a storyteller, a visionary, and a master of his own destiny. His life was a blend of ambition and artistry, a testament to the enduring allure of a well-crafted narrative. And so, with a wink to the ages, Ramses Roman II secured his place in history, not just as a pharaoh, but as a legend.